Let's go live button, which means we need to wait for the stream to fire up all across the internet. If you're not familiar with the stream, then you may not know this, but we are multi-streaming now on a number of different platforms, and YouTube always takes a minute to get started, but it looks like we're alive and well. So let's get going, shall we? Hold on. Forgot the wrong button over there. Now let's get started because I can see my screen. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. Throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today because we've got a lot to get into. We're going to be talking about inflation. What? Inflation? This isn't a monetary policy show. What the heck are we talking about inflation for? Well, because it all starts with the money. Our monetary policy is the backbone of everything else that we bicker about a lot in this country. And we've talked about a lot of the problems over this last year, talking about the pandemic, a lot of the summer unrest, and a lot of the turmoil that we've seen throughout the country. Well, we've done a lot as a country to mitigate some of those harms, some of those ills in our society that stem the consequences of some of the unrest, some of the pandemic response. And so now we look back and the bill is coming due. And economists and market analysts are a little bit concerned that maybe we are facing what they're calling a time bomb. Remember this thumbnail that we had? A time bomb out there. So we're going to be talking about inflation because there is some interesting stuff happening here. We want to make sure that we're caught up to speed. We're going to talk about Deutsche Bank. They are forecasting now that the next 40 years or so are going to be trying times for a lot of our politicians. So we want to see what's going on there. We're going to do a quick crash course on inflation, what that means and how that works, because it is going to be something that I think we're going to be hearing about for the foreseeable future. Then we're going to change gears. We're going to talk about Iowa because the governor there, Kim Reynolds, just signed into law a bill called House File 802, going to take effect July 1, coming up, a couple weeks. And it is banning critical race theory from being taught in Iowa schools. So I have a copy of the bill, House File 802. We're going to read through it. We're going to look at what is actually in there. So it doesn't say, this is banning critical race theory, but it gives us some pretty clear guidance on what type of material are allowed and not allowed, what type of curriculum is prohibited from being taught in local schools there. So interesting stuff we're going to talk about. Then there's this new article that is floating around right now that was written by a doctor named Donald Moss. And he's not real happy with whiteness. He calls it a malignant parasitic-like condition. So I didn't know I had that, but we're going to learn a lot more about what's going on with that. So we're going to hear from Dr. Donald Moss, whatever that means, whatever his analysis means. We have the abstract of the paper. So we're going to take a look at that. Then lastly, we've got a bad Popo we got to talk about. This guy, his name is Senior Corporal Rodney Dunn, and he was conducting a traffic stop, so-called, on a highway, dark at night. The driver of the vehicle, her name was Nicole Harper, 38 years old and pregnant. And suddenly, this cop is not happy with how she's pulling over and decides he's going to take matters into his own hands. So we're going to show you the body camera video or the dash cam footage on this situation and talk about this case because Nicole Harper has filed a lawsuit against that officer and against the city or the police department claiming damages, punitive damages, compensatory damages. And when we go through the body camera, you'll understand what we're talking about. So we've got a lot to get into. A couple quick things before we dive into it all. I want to remind you there are some nice links down below. We have a crypto channel where I just a couple days ago talked about the dark side hackers. Remember, they were the hacking group that took control of the pipeline out on the East Coast. And so the FBI went in and tracked down their money, their Bitcoin, following it from one wallet to another eventually seized it, $2.3 million. So we go through the affidavit and the search warrant. If you haven't checked that video out, I'd encourage you to go do that, as well as subscribe to some of the other channels down below. We talk a lot about Arizona law on our R&R Law Group channel, and we love to help good people who have been charged with crimes in Arizona get the representation they need. So if you know anybody in the state of Arizona that needs help with that, be sure to send them our way. Couple quick things. We have a law enforcement interaction training, which is coming up on Saturday, which I'm actually very excited about. So I was working on the presentation this morning, and I found this clip of an officer that is supposed to be telling the youngins, young children, young kids just getting their driver's licenses, how to drive their vehicles. He's giving them advice, you know, keep your registration handy, make sure you're respectful to the officer, and so on and so forth. But then, I agree with everything he says, till the last little bit there. So I have that clip. We're going to start off the law enforcement interaction training on Saturday morning at 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And of course, that is free for people over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is where you can sign up for that. We also have a monthly meetup coming up. We also are going to be taking questions over there. There's a live chat right now. So as we go through the show, be sure to get your questions in. If you are not able to make it to the law enforcement interaction training, I am going to post up the recording for Locals subscribers, and it will also be available for sale at Gumroad, which you can find my link down in the description down there below. All right, so that is enough of the self-promotion there. Let's get into the news of the day. 2020 was a heck of a year. The entire country had to make some pretty serious adjustments to deal with the consequences of the pandemic. And then to add on top of that, we had a lot of just social unrest in general. We had Antifa, we had BLM, we had social unrest, we had the Capitol Hill insurrection, we had a lot of different animosity and vitriol all around the country. And so many people have sort of been equating what we went through like an explosion, like society is sort of wobbly right now, due to the fact that so much is sort of uncertain. And different people have called it different things, but now that we're looking back on the last year, the year is 2021, and we're sort of doing a retrospective, hindsight, taking a look and saying, what happened there, and what are we going to have to do in the future to deal with some of the consequences that we're still feeling, right? This is a long-term thing that we're going to be going through. The domino effect is still cascading down. And so now economists and market analysts are saying, whoa, wait a minute, we just did a whole lot of stuff this last year. We need to analyze the current state of affairs. So I want to show you this article. There's a bank here called Deutsche Bank. They are warning now of what they call a global time bomb coming due to rising inflation. And so we're going to talk about inflation here. This was published here by Jeff Cox a couple days ago, June 7th. And what they're saying is that this is a very, very explosive thing that is coming down the line. So we're going to talk about inflation here in a little bit. But I just want to frame out how this works and why this has become the issue that it has become. So if you recall, Joe Biden has been spending a lot of money. We've talked a lot about it on this channel. Very frequently, we have $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, $900 billion here, $800 billion there. Ever since he took office, there's been a lot of spending. And very recently, we talked about one of the limitations on that spending. Sounds like their infrastructure talks between one of the senators from West Virginia sort of came to a screeching halt, but they're looking for more money, right? They're spending and spending and spending like crazy. In fact, the numbers are so high, I want to show you this summary here from Ben Wick over at Business Insider. He says, the $5 trillion in pandemic-era stimulus, $5 trillion, okay, see, that's a big number there, is more than triple the Great Recession-era aid and suggest a permanent shift in the way that Congress spends, okay? And so you're going to be imagining that $5 trillion, right? Yeah, of course, it's going to be 3 times whatever the Great Recession era is because that happened back during the Great Recession. That was a long time ago, but I'm guessing this is all inflation adjusted. And so they're telling us that what our government is doing is very, very expensive, at least in historical context. We have a note down here. Passage of Joe Biden's stimulus plan brings the total pandemic relief tab to $5 trillion. Okay, and that's Joe Biden's. Now, this was published on March 10th, 2020. It's like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, right? March 10th, we're in June. So it's a lot of spending. And in historical context, this is something that is even more than triple, not more than the Great Recession era, more than triple the Great Recession era. And we all sort of recall what happened there and how the mega change that happened in our country industrially as society started to sort of deal with that. led to FDR and a lot of expansion of the government throughout the entire infrastructure of our nation. And it's not just over, okay? Now, many places are opening back up. Arizona's largely open. Other states are reopening up. People are saying the economy's coming back. This is why we're seeing some supply chain disruptions. This is why gas is so expensive, or lumber is so expensive, or you can't go buy a new house here in Arizona because prices are through the roof. Everything's doubled and tripled. So why is that happening if everything is over? Well, it's not. In fact, the government is still paying money out. Look at this article that came out yesterday. More than 2.3 million new stimulus checks have been sent out, right? A new set of stimulus checks up to $1,400 per person has been sent, the government announced on Wednesday. Wednesday, June 9th, 2.3 million people got new checks, $1,400 apiece. That's more than 2.3 million payments, representing over $4.2 billion. It's on its way. Figure includes plus up payments to people who are due new or additional money now that their tax returns have been processed. So, more printing, more money. And the reason why this is problematic, we're going to get to this, but, this is not necessarily about not helping people. Okay, there are people, there are poor people, there are people who are in dire straits as a result of the pandemic and the consequences of a lot of what our government has imposed upon them. Right? The pandemic was one thing. The virus was one thing. The government's reaction was something entirely different. And there are a lot of people that are hurt from the former and a lot of people who are hurt from the latter. And so we got to take care of both groups of people. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the government printing gobs of money. And what does that do to the very people that they intend to help? So now let's think about those same two buckets of people. The people that the government hurt by their response and the people that the pandemic hurt. By printing a bunch of money and giving them a temporary stimulus here, we're going to see how that might have long cascading effects that ultimately hurt them worse than it would be had they not gotten the stimulus in the first place. So let's take a quick look. We're going to dive deep into inflation here in a minute, and I've got some graphics and some charts. I'm not an economist. We're going to try to make this, moderately interesting when we're talking about monetary policy. But before we do, we're going to put a pin in that because another story came out today that we're just going to pause. So put a pin in the inflation stuff. Don't forget inflation. We're coming back to that puppy. But before we do, speaking about all this government spending, there's a news story that says, well, most of that, or at least 400 billion of it, may have gone to fraudulent claims. Axios is reporting that half of the pandemic's unemployment money may have been stolen. Oh my goodness. And you're going to notice this may, right? We're going to come back to that. It says criminals may have stolen as much as half of the unemployment benefits the U.S. has been pumping out over the last year. Why it matters? Well, unemployment fraud during the pandemic could easily reach $400 billion. Okay, now I know when we're talking about government spending that it's easy to get lost in the zeros and the B's and the M's, and it's all just very complicated because they just sort of throw it around like it's meaningless. It almost doesn't mean anything, right? 400 billion, I don't know. What's the national budget every year? Okay, a lot more than that. So is that reasonable? Is that a lot? Is that a rounding error? Is that tip money? I mean, 400 billion certainly sounds like a lot to me, but when we spend, 900 billion on Lord knows what, it's multiple times a year, maybe it's not that big of an issue. Anyways, all right, so it's a lot of money, but we don't know how much. We're going to put it in context here in a minute. When the pandemic hit, states weren't prepared. They all knew that fraud was inevitable, but they decided that getting the money out to people who were desperately in need of it was more important than making sure all of them were genuine, right? So they know that they're incompetent, that it's a bureaucratic mess. They're going to be just throwing money at people. So they figure there's going to be fraud. But that's okay. It's better to get the money out the door. And there's some actual, economic arguments. I don't think that they're particularly persuasive, but if you're a Keynesian economist, then you may be somebody who says, well, it doesn't really matter what we do with the money. As long as we were just pumping it out into the economy, giving it out to the people, they're going to spend it one way or the other. There's even arguments that even the criminal, sort of black markets are part of the economy in some way because they're funneling transactions that are creating profits for people that are then, redirected back into the main economy. And so the fact that, 400 billion may have gone to criminal enterprises, some people might argue, well, it's not that big of a deal. The other people might say, well, that is a pretty big deal because if these were places like China, Nigeria, Russia, and elsewhere that were siphoning off these funds, that doesn't come back to the American economy. That goes out, to other nation states or to political cronies who are going to use it in ways that actually don't benefit the American economy. So, there's that argument. I don't buy it. Now, by the numbers. So when people say, oh, but this just says may, right? I saw this posted all over Twitter today. It doesn't say that they were stolen, Rob. It says that they may have been stolen. So now we have to sort of weigh the experts. Are we going to listen to Congress, Elizabeth Warren on the banking committee, or are we going to listen to this guy? Blake Hall, CEO of ID.me, says a service that tries to prevent this kind of fraud tells Axios America has lost more than $400 billion to fraudulent claims. As much as 50% of all unemployment monies might have been stolen. So he's the CEO of a company that deals with this stuff. All right. Is he the only one? No. Haywood Talcove, the CEO of LexisNexis Risk Solutions, he estimates that at least 70% of the money stolen by imposters ultimately left the country, most of it ending up in the hands of China, Nigeria, Russia, and elsewhere. These groups are definitely backed by the state. So these are foreign governments ripping off the country. Much of the rest of the money was stolen by street gangs domestically, who have made up a greater share of the fraudsters in recent months. Now, they asked the Treasury Department here, declined to comment on these estimates. Right, so do you expect them to give you some explanation? Of course not. They're the Treasury Department. Now, if you just do some basic math on this, everybody knows I can't do math on this channel, which is why I went over to Wolfram Alpha. Let's just plug some numbers in, shall we? Let's take a look. So $400 billion that were stolen. We have 155 generously. Last number I pulled up was from 2018. I think the numbers there were 145 million or so taxpayers. So we take 400 billion divided by 155 million, we get $2,580.65, my friend. So if you paid your taxes and you believe this, that maybe a good portion of all of these trillions, all of the $5 trillion, maybe a portion of that got siphoned off. Well, if you want to just round it, let's say 400 billion out of the 5 trillion total, your bill, your portion of that, about $2,500. So you're welcome. Thanks for paying your taxes. It's going to good use. We promise. Keep going. Keep paying them. All right. So now that we know what kind of joke it is and how much money we're talking about, that was the point of the 400 billion. 400 billion divided by every taxpayer is $2,500. Okay. We're talking about 5 trillion that was spent under Biden, according to the CNBC article. A lot of money. I didn't do the math on this, but divide the 5 trillion now by the 155 million taxpayers. Ugh. All right, well, they're just going to keep printing the money because they can't generate it. So let's talk about this now. What is inflation? This article, put together by Kimberly Amadeo, reviewed here by Michael J. Boyle. I liked this definition a lot. She says inflation. How is it measured and managed? And why is inflation one of the Fed's top priorities? Well, let's take a look. Inflation reduces the purchasing power of each unit of currency. Okay, so each unit of currency, think of this like a dollar, right? Inflation reduces the purchasing power of each dollar, makes it worth less. This leads to increases in the prices of goods or services over time. Because if your dollar is worth less, you're not going to be able to buy the same amount of goods. So if you go to the store today, you buy a pound of beef, it costs you $1 or whatever you get for it. And tomorrow, you want to spend the same dollar, but you get less than a pound of beef because your dollar doesn't buy as much. Or if you're going to spend $1, you get less than the same amount of beef that you got the last time you bought it. We all are sort of seeing this happen around us. This is an economics term, this article says, which means you have to spend more to fill your gas tank and buy a gallon of milk or get a haircut. In other words, it increases your cost of living. Okay? It's almost like a tax. It's almost like everything that you do has an additional cost. And where does that cost come from? It's because the government is inflating the currency. And why are they doing that? It's to pay for all of their expenses. It's for them to make sure that when they have a $900 billion budget problem, or when they need to more stimulus for another 2.3 million Americans, that they have the money to do it. They're inflating the currency. That gets trickled down to all of us in our cost of living. It's like a tax across the board. So let's keep that in mind. U.S. inflation, this article says, has reduced the value of the dollar. Compare the dollar's value today with that in the past. So as prices rise, your money buys less. We're going to run through some examples of this here in a minute. For that reason, it can reduce your standard of living over time. So let's think about this now. if the government is saying to people, we're going to give you a bunch of stimulus, and we say, great, we love that money. We all need it. We're in the middle of a pandemic. You shut everything down. You should give us some money. So then they say, okay, great, but we don't have it. So we're going to print it all and then funnel that down to you. Now, what that has done is it's increased the monetary supply. It's inflated the money. And what that does for you is it increases your cost of goods because every single dollar you have is now worth less, which means in the long term, you are in a worse position. You may have gotten that $2,300 or the $1,400 or whatever it is, but when you add up every time you go and you fill up your gas tank, buy a gallon of milk, go buy some bread, go out to eat, everything goes up 3 to 5%, let's say, and that adds up to a lot more than the $1,400 does. But then they'll walk around and scream at everybody that, oh, we're only going to raise the taxes on the rich. Meanwhile, they're printing a ton of money that the middle class and the poor pay for. And they call themselves humanitarians. Ronald Reagan was right when he said this down here at the bottom. He said, inflation is as violent as a mugger, as frightening as an armed robber, and as deadly as a hitman. It's the silent tax that we just sort of silently absorb. It's a huge problem, and there is a ton of it coming down the pike. And the reason, and as we're discussing this, we got to ask ourselves why, right? Why are they doing this? Is it just for pandemic stimulus? Is this just for economic recovery? Or are they transitioning into a new system of order? I want to show you what I'm talking about. A new method of using the monetary supply, using money and inflation to promote social goals, to achieve political ends. This is the argument that is being made by Deutsche Bank. We're going to take a look at it. First and foremost, let's take a look at, make sure we understand what inflation looks like. So this is over from Investopedia. You see that there. And inflation, it says back in 1970s, all you needed here was one quarter, right? One token, whatever this gold token is. 1970, one token buys you one cup of coffee. But then you go up to 1980s because they printed a bunch more tokens. Now, suddenly that one token, that's not worth one token anymore. So you need two tokens to buy the same cup of coffee. And the same thing happens every year. Then the monetary, the dollar is so inflated when you go up to 2019 now, the average cup of coffee, of course we all know this, is $1.59, right? And so now it takes you, what is this, seven coins to buy the same coffee. Right, so it's 2019, it goes up significantly. So we know what this means. We see this everywhere we go. We see prices going up. We see the value of the dollar going down. Gas is up. Milk is up. Everything's up. Lumber's up. Copper's up. All the commodities markets are up. Everybody's paying for that. And so now what the question is this transitory? Is this something that is going to just sort of fly by the night? Well, we know that this is something that sticks around, right? Here is something that you may have seen at your local restaurant, right? The size of the meat patty has gone down, right? You get less for the same amount of money. You may recall this, right? It's called shrinkflation. All your products in your house are kind of shrinking up a little bit, right? You have this toilet paper. Remember the great toilet paper saga crisis of 2020? Well, they're going down a little bit. Products are just shrinking up. Deodorant, Old Spice has shrunken up. Tide, laundry detergent has gone down. There was the Cadbury cream eggs. Remember that? That guy from The Office, Ryan, went on somebody's late night talk show and held up the Cadbury egg, whatever that was. Everything is shrinking because they want consumers to continue to buy the products, but they don't want to raise their prices because consumers are price conscious. So they go in, they say, well, that gallon of milk costs $2. Well, now it costs, now it's going up for the same gallon. Something like that, you can't really shrink because we know what it is. But these other products, you can. Old Spice, you just kind of go from 3 ounces to 2.4 ounces and sell it for the same price rather than raising the price. So people go, why is it getting more expensive? I can't afford that. Now, we kind of have a good understanding what inflation is. I probably beat that horse to death, but let us go into some analysis now. Here is a little bit of background on Deutsche Bank. So I want to show you why or what this organization is doing. So Deutsche Bank, they've been around forever. You can see they are, a massive organization. So they were founded March in 1869. And Deutsche Bank means, German bank. It's a German bank. It was founded in Berlin, 1870. It was a specialist bank for financing foreign trade and promoting German exports. It's been around forever. Lot of controversy, lot of, World War II history here and there. If you look up their Wikipedia, you'll see just, lots of issues with all sorts of stuff, as you would imagine for a company who's been around since the 1870s. Now, you'll notice down here, revenue, $24 billion in 2020, so it's massive. We also have it looks like a total assets, maybe under management or in total, is $1.3 trillion in 2020. Okay, so the point of this is we're talking about $1.3 trillion. So they have a ton of money. This is not a government. This is a bank. And they are doing some very serious analysis on inflation and how this all works and what is coming down the pike. And I wanted to point out this article and this organization because they are different than kind of what everybody else is saying. If you listen to the Fed, if you listen to all the bureaucrats in Washington today and all of the elected officials around the world, they're meeting today at the G7 and they're all sort of patting each other's backs. Hey, we did it together. Trump's out. Great. And they're all very excited with themselves that they've sort of survived the pandemic. Problem is, they are all in lockstep and they're sort of making sure that the public believes that this narrative that all of this inflation, all of this money spending is all transitory, meaning it's all going to come and go. Don't worry about it. Don't take a look at anything. Very consistent. Deutsche Bank is giving us an alternative perspective, and they tell us that. They say, hey, listen, we're trying to spark a debate here. So take that for what it is. Let me show you this. We're not going to read through the entirety. I read the whole thing last night. Outstanding read if you want to read it. But I would encourage you to do that if you're interested in this stuff. But just a couple highlights. So they posted this earlier this week, June 7th, 2021. And they are telling us that Deutsche Bank research warns of the impending threat of rising inflation. You're going to notice, okay, a couple PhDs here. We got David Folkerts, PhD, Group Chief Economist, Economic Research. We have John Reed, Thematic Research, CPA Research Analyst. Deutsche Bank says it's published its first paper. The new occasional that is titled What's in the Tails is designed to further stimulate debate with our clients, okay? So they're being a little bit contrarian here by providing a reasonable alternative to the central forecasts and scenarios, okay? U.S. government is telling us one thing. The Fed, Jerome Powell, all these people, very consistent. Oh, just transitory, not a big deal. Consumer price index is out today, 5%, not a big deal. It's all just transitory. So everybody out there, don't freak out, okay? Just keep going about your business. Yeah, you're going to see some prices come up a little bit, but they're going to go back down. And the Feds are not going to raise the interest rate. This is important for everybody, whether you know it or not. This is stuff that impacts small businesses, impacts big businesses. And if we start seeing inflation rates raised, you've got people with student loans, and the whole economy can come to a screeching halt with the adjustment of interest rates and with rapidly rising inflation. So this could be something that turns into a big deal or not. The whole thing could be overblown. But we're going to be up to speed on it either way. Now, today's paper, they say, is inflation. They are calling it nothing insignificant. They're saying this is the defining macro strategy of this decade, right? For all of 2020, because the government is changing how they are approaching this issue of inflation. The government is seeking to change a lot of other things. We're going to talk about critical race theory in the next segment. We have talked about a lot of the justice reform things that they want to get done, a lot of the educational systems that they want to reform, the tax policies that they want to modify and change, big changes across the board. Spending and not worrying about inflation is also on that list. So today's paper, as we said, they're noting this is the biggest macro strategy of this decade. They're saying the very role of government in the economy is undergoing the biggest shift in 40 years, manifested in the receding fear of inflation and the rising levels of government debt that shaped a generation of policymakers. They don't care about printing money. They don't care about government debt. It's going out the window. They're saying, and this is important, replacing it is the perspective that the economic policy should now prioritize broader social goals. Okay, all of this talk about inflation was for that line. Replacing it is the perspective that economic policy should now prioritize broader social goals. Okay, at the expense, something's got to give. Either inflation gives, government debt gives, or we achieve these social goals. Right? At the heart of the research, The report debates whether inflation is transitory or the pursuit of these social priorities by governments will mean inflation will have longer-term and far-reaching implications for the health of the global economy. Either way, higher inflation is coming. Policymakers are about to face their toughest battle in 40 years, they say. 40 years, right? So we know, according to them, in the last 40 years, we had a lot of policymakers, economists, market analysts who would say things like, we got to be concerned about inflation. We got to be concerned about government debt because it makes your money unsound. It's a problem. And we see what it does with our boom and bust cycles. We have all these bubbles that pop up. It causes a lot of chaos in our economy. But inflation was always something to be managed. But now what Deutsche Bank is saying, and this is not an American bank, this is a German bank. It's German bank in German. The first word. They are telling us that they are predicting that this inflation is going to be a problem and that the governments don't care about it. That is a lower priority. Inflation, debt, those are lower priorities than achieving the social goals. So it's more important to enact whatever justice they're working on that particular day. It's always changing. I can't keep track of it. Somebody's always fighting for some version of justice that suits their end. And in order to achieve that, we're talking about massive economic redistribution, massive social programs, massive government spending at the expense of the fiscal sanity of the nation. And it's a decision, meaning all of the $5 trillion that we just saw being spent is not necessarily about responding to the pandemic. It's about changing how the government spends money in the future, forgetting about inflation, forgetting about debt, which is why I started a crypto channel, by the way. It's down in the description below. Okay, so a new report came out. What prompted all of this? Today, MarketWatch tells us that U.S. consumer prices soar again. They push CPI inflation, which is a consumer price index, to a 13-year high, folks. Inflation surges as the economy recovers, but the Fed insists it's all temporary. So far, Wall Street agrees. Now, I read the Financial Times. They don't agree. And this article, you're going to see they're kind of flipping about it, like, oh, I guess Wall Street doesn't care, whatever. The numbers, the cost of living surged again. In May, your costs are going up. It drove the pace of inflation to a 13-year high, 5% inflation, reflecting a broad increase in prices confronting Americans as the economy recovers. Consumer price index, it jumped 0.6% last month. Government said soaring used car prices accounted for 1/3 of the overall increase, right? So the markets are ebbing and flowing right now. Economists polled by the Dow Jones, they had forecasts. Look at this. Economists previously, they were polled by the Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. They had forecast previously a 0.5% increase in the CPI. Looking like it's a little bit higher than that, doesn't it? Inflation surges to a 5% yearly rate. This is what it looks like historically. The rate of inflation over the past year has escalated from 5%, from 4.2% the prior month. To put that at the highest level since 2008. Right. And, I was in the workforce in 2008. I went to law school. I was gearing to go right into law school in 2008. And I was doing construction before. When I was in college, I was a political science undergrad and I was doing construction, building swimming pools, digging ditches in the hot Arizona sun. I couldn't wait to go to law school and, get 3 years off of doing that. Coincidentally, 2007, 2008, we had that major market crash. Construction dried up. The swimming pool company just kind of went up anyway. So it was a good transition. It was a good timing for me that I was already transitioning. But I remember what happened when the markets got roiled. Construction was devastated. I mean, the entire economy was wrecked in 2008 for a long time. And you're going to notice that we're getting up to those levels again, aren't we? Right on this chart. Recession. Inflation was massive at that time. We're getting right up there again. So just flagging that for everybody here. Now, before that, the last time inflation was this high, as it was now, was in 1991. Another closely watched measure of inflation that emits volatile food and energy also shot up 0.7. The 12-month rate climbed from 3.8 to 3.8 from 3.3. This is a 29-year high. All right, core rate, they say, is a more accurate measure of underlying inflation, but soaring inflation stems in large part from reopening the economy. If price pressures don't ease in the near future, it's going to put more stress on the recovery. The Federal Reserve, the nation's inflation watchdog, insists that price pressures will wane once the U.S. and the global economies regain a more normal footing. The upsurge, they say, it's mostly tied to temporary shortages. They're going to fade away as supply catches up. The worry among some inflation watchers, though, is that part of the increase will get embedded in wages and prices will become harder to eradicate. The Fed would have to raise interest rates sooner than it wants and risk short-circuiting the economy in a worst-case scenario. And they say the debate will play out over the next year. For now, Wall Street isn't worrying much, right? Because the Fed's not worrying. Nobody cares. They're just printing more money. They're talking about more infrastructure. They just sent out a bunch more money to a bunch of Americans who I'm sure some people need it, but probably not everybody. All right, we've got our questions coming in from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And if you haven't already checked out the crypto channel, you know, there are alternatives to the dollar that are being built. Might be a good time to take a look at it. So our first question from watchingthewatchers.locals.com is from Joe Snow. Joe says, love the show. Love the community you've built here. Nice work. Thanks for everything you do. Well, thank you, Joe. What a nice comment. What a nice way to start the day. Thank you for that. We're grateful that you are here and a part of it. And well, I'll see you over there. We have Want to Know, says Robert Gruler, how high will inflation be at the 2022 elections? 20, 30%? Besides spending money you don't have, how do you lower inflation and keep interest rates from going up? And what to do? What do older people do about inflation? Those now making $15 an hour, did they gain anything at all, or did they lose it to higher prices? Yeah, so there are all sorts of charts. So if you go and you actually read the full Deutsche Bank article, they have all sorts of beautiful charts that I would have loved to have spent 2 hours going over here. But there's a lot, and they show you, right? If your dollar is worth less, you can actually go back and sort of make adjustments to hourly wages that are based on inflation numbers. And the hourly wages right now are dipping way down, historically low because of this. Because think about that, right? If somebody makes, I don't know, $20 an hour and they are, that is not changing for them unless they get a raise. But the value of that $20 that they make for that hour, it doesn't go as far. So it's almost like a tax to them. Now that money is being diluted because it's essentially being extracted out of them and taken by the government in the form of new printing that they're redistributing out to everybody else. So when people say, oh, I'm getting free money, no, you are not, my friend. You might think you are, but you are not. Ultimately, if you are in a position where you're getting, free money from the government, on the grand scale of things, an additional $5 trillion that are being printed out of thin air, you've got a share in that. Some people think that $1 that's being spent by the government has a compound effect, to be fair, right? The Keynesians say that. They say that if the government gives you $1, well, then you go and you spend that and you create $1.20 of economic activity. And that $1.20 is spent by somebody else. It creates another $2 of economic activity. And then now we've got this compounding effect that creates all this economic activity that we tax, and then we take that money back into the federal coffers. Like, that's their argument for it. I don't necessarily buy that. I don't understand how you have these sort of these booms and busts that you create with these. All right, it's a great question. Thank you for Want to Know. There's like 6 questions in there. I'm looking at them, and I think we got the best of them. Thank you for that. All right, Pinky number 2 is in the house. Says Rob, inflation is coming because of the currency reset. Getting away from the hands that bound us to keep us to debt since the Civil War. Hopefully inflation time period will be short. The globalists are causing this to happen. It's the money managers, right? There's all the central bank conspiracy theories out there. I think Alex Jones is probably onto something on that. Robert Gruler Want to Know says, didn't the Russians and the Chinese and others need new computers to ransomware us? New computers? I don't know. I mean, the Chinese have some pretty fast computers. I think they're working on a supercomputer like AI. It's going to take over the globe over there. We'll see. Software Nugget says there's never been a good check against unemployment fraud, nor does the government care because they're not spending their own money. Right. You're exactly right. Good point, Software Nugget. They have no skin in the game. Nobody cares. And if a portion, let's say this, if a portion of the money happens to disappear and nobody asks questions about it, and somebody knows about that pipeline, and that person who knows about that pipeline might do some favors for a congressperson, and they sort of work together in this whole little shtick, nobody cares because they're all part of the grift. The only person who is hurt in the whole transaction happens to be the American taxpayer, which nobody cares about, obviously. Now, Want to Know says, this is going to go on for a while. This is like them stealing value of Rob's money, because they are. You're right, Want to Know. You're damn right they are. That's right. I work hard for it. And they just say, oh, it's like worth, less than what it was previously. I earned it at $1, and then suddenly it's less than $1. Big problem. Christina's here, says, how does inflation affect the used goods market? Good question. So if, so I'm not an economist here, but right now there's a big issue with used cars. So, the inflation, I think, for those products are going through the roof. I saw that in a lot of literature, that there's sort of a supply side problem with new cars. So people are very interested in used cars. And so right now you have these markets that are fluctuating. So if the supply chain, this is what the Fed is saying, if the supply chain problem is now transitory, and we get over the chip shortage, and we get over the commodity short, the copper and steel, if they can figure all that out, then what the Fed is saying is that in the long term, or in the very near short term, the markets will balance back out. New cars will start coming off of the assembly line again, so people will not be looking to buy old cars so much, and the used car market will normalize again. So right now those are very high. But the point remains the same. If across the board the entire monetary supply, meaning the entire every single dollar in the country, is now worth less, then that's going to apply to basically everything that you do, unless you see a relationship where whatever it is you're trying to buy, whatever that used goods market is, there could be changes in that market. And so let me frame out another converse theory here. That is something that Cathie Wood, by the way, I think she's outstanding. If you're into financial stuff, Cathie Wood is the CEO of ARK Investment, and she's brilliant. One of the most impressive people I've seen recently. I love when she gives her. I just listened to her monthly market report this past week. Brilliant. And she is saying that she doesn't buy any of these inflation fears. She says that technology is very deflationary. And so what we're sort of seeing now with people working from home, a lot of remote, calling in, and technology is advancing to the point where it is acting as a deflationary pressure. So while the government is printing a bunch of money, technology, because it's improving, meaning technology is providing us more value for the same dollar. So the US government is making our dollars worth less. Technology is making our dollars worth more. And you can sort of think about this on any number of levels, right? You bought an iPhone, and every year, whether you buy a new one or not, it kind of gets a little bit better, right? You get some more features that are put into it, and you didn't pay much for it. So that $1,000 brand new iPhone, maybe now it's kind of has features that are like a $1,200 iPhone, because technology is acting as a deflationary pressure. So you've got all these different pressures that are, coming to bear on one another. And this is why it's such a contentious debate. Deutsche Bank says, no, it's the government printing all this money that's the problem. And the Fed say, no, it's just normal economic market forces that are all compounding with each other. And it's all going to balance out soon, right? Everything's sort of in this jumbled up mess. But as soon as we start opening up and we can untangle all of this stuff, it's all going to settle back out. But in the meantime, there's been all these little bubbles that have been created through all of this government intervention, all of this stimulus for different markets and passing a bunch of money and helping them and helping them and helping them, that you create these unnatural bubbles in the markets because you're sort of responding to supply and demand unnaturally. It's the problem with centralized management of government. And our government has been trying to do that, right? And it's been a disaster for this entire year. And the bill is coming due, a big one, $5 trillion. And I think that's going to impact, everything, as does Deutsche Bank. Now we have Sliding Edge says worthless. Or did you mean our currency is worth less? Sad and not a joke. Yeah, worth less or worthless, right? I mean, there's an outstanding book that I was reading it's called The Beginning of Infinity, or The End of Infinity, by David Deutsche. No, David Duke. No, not David Duke. It's David, forget the name of it. But he goes through and he gives us an analysis on money. He says, listen, the government, what do? They say that you have to use this piece of paper that's not backed by anything. It's just a piece of paper. It used to be backed by gold. It used to be sort of, something that you could trade in and get some monetary value for it, but now not anymore. Now the dollar is just whatever the currency is, and it's because the US says it has value, it has value. And he uses this as a general concept. So, don't beat me up too badly over this. But he says the government prints the money. And what they do is they tell you that you have to pay taxes on that money. So they take what would ordinarily be a worthless piece of paper and they make it worth something because they tell you that you have to pay taxes on it. They use the monopoly on force that they have to encourage you to pay those taxes under the threat of the force of the government. We're talking philosophically here. So that incentivizes you now to go and get their useless pieces of paper, because if you don't, you might be subject to the power of the government. You might be incarcerated, for example, for not paying your taxes. So now suddenly that worthless piece of paper becomes very valuable because you have to pay your taxes, and the only currency that you can pay your taxes in is the dollar. And if you want to live in America and participate, you got to pay your taxes in the dollar. And every single time you spend something and somebody receives anything of value, they got to pay their taxes in the dollar. So we're all sort of bought into this currency. Even though, is it really tied to anything? It's a good debate. We have Pinky number 2 says, these stimulus packages have payoffs to other countries in them. They have forever. Yeah, we've gone through many of them. I think, we've gone through billions here, 500 million there, 700 million here, because we have had so many corrupt politicians on both sides. It seems this is starting to change. The Dems are losing power, and it helps the situation. They are in a little bit of a kerfuffle these days, aren't they? Last I saw, AOC, Ilhan Omar versus Nancy Pelosi and some other Republican, all fighting over Israel, I think. All right, Want to Know says, will history repeat itself? Germany before World War II was using money as wallpaper. Then German guy came in against Antifa, and the communists put everyone to work. It worked for a little while. No, we don't know. History is not going to repeat itself. I think he's talking about Adolf, which we're not going to let that happen again. I'm Not Gas is in the house. What's up? I'm Not Gas. I don't think I've seen you in a while. Says the best stocks against hyperinflation: land, gold, silver, and bullets. Yeah, right. Because these things tend not to inflate. Okay, gold and silver. There's another book that I feel like I'm dropping books all day, but there's another book I was listening to called The Bitcoin Standard, which is a very good book. And he talks about why gold is something that is really sort of resistant to inflationary pressures. There's only so much of it. It really cannot be consumed. It's not a consumable like some other things. They can't really increase the mining production of gold. So they can't inflate it, which is why it's so sort of protected against inflation. Whereas the dollar, they just print, they just go in, change some numbers around. Yeah, print another billion here, another trillion over here, which is different with land. Land, right? There's only so much land that can be consumed. So those are naturally inflationary resistant. I'm Not Gas says, trying to keep value in valueless fiat currency is an exercise in futility. We were always headed down this path. The people in power just determine how fast we are running down it. Yeah, I mean, everything is sort of controlled by this, right? They can, you just think about it, right? I have a small business in Scottsdale, Arizona. Really, if they change the abortion laws, if something happens with the Supreme Court, it's probably going to impact maybe our criminal cases if it's a criminal case, and maybe we'll have to have some changes. Probably not, though. That happens very rarely. If Joe Biden does something ridiculous with Russia or something like that, absent a nuclear war, most of it is kind of on the margins on how it impacts us. Which is why, when Joe Biden comes in, it's a lot of culture war stuff, and it's a lot of, diplomatic boneheaded mistakes and everything. But when people say, oh, he's going to wreck America overnight, I'm like, what's he going to do? He's slowly working on it. But the big issue here is the monetary. Everything we do is based on that. It's the skeleton. It's the spinal cord. So it's very important that we at least pause, spend a little time on it here today. Now, Sharon says, Deutsche Bank is right. Deutsche Bank is right. There can be little doubt that the Marxist Dems who are running everything now are using inflation as a tool to promote their political agenda, which is exactly their point. It says, it looks to me Like the last days of the Weimar Republic, my guess is there will be a substantial unrest as people are no longer able to buy necessities. Yeah, there's that picture from World War II, and where I think there's somebody who has a wheelbarrow full of Deutsche Marks trying to go buy a loaf of bread because the money has no value anymore. It's very important. That book, The Bitcoin Standard, is great. Goes through a history of the Romans. And for a long time, the Romans were the powerhouse of the entire world. And why was that? Technological superiority, innovation, all of those things, right? Yeah. So how did they foster a marketplace that facilitated that type of a society that was so advanced at that time? Well, according to the Bitcoin Standard, it's because of a sound monetary supply. When they were printing their coins, they weighed the exact amount. They knew exactly what they were worth. And there was trust and truth to that coin. You would take it around and everybody knew what it was worth. But then emperor after emperor would come in and they would need to spend more money and they would need to raise more funds. So what would they do? They would take that same coin and they would sort of, cut off a little bit of the gold, cut off a little bit of the silver. And that same coin that used to be worth, let's say $1, was now worth 90 cents. And then they started moving into sort of, more of a representative banking system, and they just kept inflating the currency. All of the currencies kept starting to be worth less and less. And so people had less faith in that. So they stopped doing business and transacting in that nation. They went elsewhere, and the Roman Empire just slowly dissipated and fizzled away in what we all know in the history books. So maybe your analogy here, Sharon, is not too far off. Software Nugget says, the best thing for the economy is for the government to stay out of the way. 100% agree with that. If they just keep printing money, things will only get worse. Yep. I totally agree with that. I think the government should just get out of our way. Just let us live our lives. Let us run things our way. All right. We have Davis Park says, slight correction. Monetary policy is policy from the central bank or the Fed. Fiscal policy is government spending. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you for that. So, obviously I don't spend a lot of time in this space. I'm trying to learn more about it. He says, don't get me wrong. Our monetary policy is disastrous. Interest rates are so low that people are borrowing money that will never be paid back. But what you're angry about is the fiscal policy. Okay. So yeah, thank you for that correction there, Davis Parks. Like I said, I'm sort of trying to learn more about this because I am figuring out how important it really is. And now what we're seeing are some of these major projected market disruptions that obviously, if I was still in college, I might have less interest in this stuff, but I've got a whole team of people here that I'm very concerned about, and I want to make sure that we're being smart and proactive and that we're planning for, some of the different contingencies that are out there. And so I just think it's important that we understand this. So fiscal policy is government spending through the bureaucrats. Monetary policy is through the central bank or the Fed. Try to remember that, but I'll probably botch it again. But thanks for the correction. We have Speech Unleashed says, first, they need to get everyone dependent on the government. Second, then they raise taxes to pay for all the things people become dependent on. Third, taxes will never go down because those social welfare programs will never be removed because doing so will, quote, hurt the people that depend on them. This is how it always has been. The difference on this time is the scale. Yeah, right. Everybody, gets a raise. Once they have that raise, it's very hard to pull that out from under them. And now any politician who does is sort of, awful. They don't get to be voted for because they're going to take stuff away from you. Meanwhile, the people who promise you everything do so with hiding the ball. They're being dishonest with you. We're going to give you all this stuff and help you all with all of these materials. But they are printing the money that is making everything else you buy worth less. All right. We've got Want to Know says, isn't the Kamala administration trying to make crypto illegal because of the ransom hacks? How did the FBI get some of it back? FBI has good hackers too. What happens if the governments of the world crack the system and take all the crypto for themselves? Well, Want to Know, I discussed that in about 40 minutes in a video that is linked down in the description on YouTube. So go check that out. It's on my crypto channel. But I went through the affidavit. They didn't crack Bitcoin. Many people were thinking that. They didn't hack the Bitcoin system. They just traced the money because Bitcoin operates on a public ledger. You can go look up any transaction you want. So what happened was it got transferred. Somehow it ended up in the custody of the FBI. They needed the warrant to go just get the custody. And basically they had the private key to get access to the Bitcoin. And that's what the seizure warrant was for. It was just about sort of a process. Now, how they got the private key, Could be up to a number of theories are floating around out there. In that video, I go through many of them. All right, so next up. But that being said, yeah, Elizabeth Warren is out there today hitting the news shows talking about the central bank digital currency. So they're talking about this, folks, whether you're into crypto or not. The US government is going towards cryptocurrencies. They're calling it a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, because they know China's doing the same thing with the yuan. And they don't want the Chinese currency to be the world reserve. They want it to be the US dollar. And if people are going to be into cryptocurrencies, well, the US government is sprinting right now in order to come up with a solution. Elizabeth Warren is now running around basically talking, down Bitcoin in order to elevate up the CBDC. She's out there yesterday, and I'm going to just go through her narrative sentence by sentence and show you what a joke the whole thing is on the crypto channel. All right, so let's take a look now from Kareem here. Says, governments in general rarely accomplish anything good, I find. I agree with you on that. I mean, very rarely they'll do something productive, but I could almost always come up with an example where I think the private sector could have done a better job faster for less resources. Almost every time. I think basically every time. There are some situations where even the government used to tell us, well, what about like NASA? So, maybe in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that was something that only, the government could do, or maybe like, the Manhattan Project, for example, the building of the nuclear bomb here in the United States very quickly to go and end World War II, against the Japanese. Maybe something like that would be within the scope and the purview of the government. But most other things, they're just awful at. I mean, actually like bad at. All right, next up, we got Leafy Bug. Good to see you, Leafy Bug. Says inflation is a feature, not a bug for the state. How to have the real value of the national debt in a year? Well, have inflation run at 50% for a year. Unfortunately, inflation is not something that can be easily and so neatly controlled. Yeah, it's going to be a problem. If it is going to be a problem, it's going to be a big problem because they printed a ton of money. Yeah, we'll see where it goes. Now, we have Joe Snow says, when inflation starts to reveal itself, it's going to go pedal to the metal like Venezuela did. It's going to become incredibly difficult to assign value to your assets. Yeah. It's scary. This is scary, right? People are starting to think, well, the toilet paper's gone. Oh no, gas is gone. I'm going to go fill up grocery bags of gasoline on the East Coast, right? Remember those stories? Well, what happens if people just suddenly, they just can't buy the regular necessities anymore because it's too expensive, right? Suddenly, a full cart walking out of the grocery store, a mom with 3 kids, like my mom was with 3 kids, walking out of the grocery store, suddenly that cart shrinks up a little bit. It's a big problem. And there's a lot of people out there who are patting themselves on the back. Oh, we're taking care of Americans by printing all this money. No, you are not. And the consequences may be pretty severe. So we'll see where that goes. Great questions. There's a lot of interest in this topic. I wasn't expecting that, but I think it's very important. I know a lot of the time we kind of come on this channel and, talk about the exciting, police shooting or whatever, but this stuff is fundamental. This stuff is important. Maybe this is how they're going to defund the police, by defunding all of us. Just keep inflating the money. No cops will have money anywhere. Neither will we. Ugh. All right. So those were great questions. Thanks for sending those over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right. We're going to move on here. We're going to change gears. We were talking very sort of dry inflationary, monetary, and fiscal policy. Fiscal's the government. Monetary's the Fed. I think I got that. All right. Hopefully I didn't butcher it. But now we're going to change gears. We're not talking about money at all. We're talking about critical race theory. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds signed a new law into bill targeting critical race theory that is eliminating some of the curriculum that wanted to be taught in Iowa schools. So this story is interesting. We're going to take a look at the bill. It goes into effect on July 1, and it's called House File 802. Not a huge bill, but we are going to look at it and see what it does, because you may be seeing this come to a state near you, hopefully. And we'll see what it actually does mechanically on the ground level with the schools in Iowa. So we're going to start by going and doing a little bit of background here from the Hawkeye, which is, I guess, the name of a website from the Des Moines Register here. It says the Iowa governor signs a law that is targeting critical race theory, saying she's against discriminatory indoctrination. All right. So we're going to take a look at this, and then I want to show you something that's happening in medicine, because we're seeing this kind of concept of critical race theory permeate its tentacles into all different facets of our life. Right now, we're talking about schools, but next we're going to talk about medicine. We just talked about, if you missed the last segment, how social goals may be working their way into economic policy. Now let's go back to the schools and see where we're at. So Kim Reynolds signs a new law that's going to target the teaching of CRT in government and other concepts in government diversity trainings in classroom curriculum. All right, here's what she says. She says, critical race theory is about labels and stereotypes, not education. It teaches kids that we should judge others based on race, gender, sexual identity, rather than the content of someone's character. Oh, I love that line. Reynolds said, and it's such a good line, content of someone's character. It has that nice alliteration, right? Content of someone's character. It's beautiful. Reynolds said in a statement, I'm proud to have worked with the legislature to promote learning, not discriminatory indoctrination. This article says, this is not my commentary, this article says critical race theory is a decades-old legal theory that examines how slavery's legacy continues to influence American society. It is not specifically named in the new legislation, but the law would ban teaching certain concepts, such as that the U.S. or Iowa is systemically racist. Okay. Sometimes they say systematically, but they got it right here. Systemically racist. Okay. So it goes into effect on July 1. Reynolds' signing comes after other Republicans across the country have said they want to eliminate this. Iowa is among more than a dozen states that have considered legislation this year aimed at eliminating similar concepts. Opponents have said that the efforts would likely discourage important conversations about racism and sexism. The Iowa legislation faced opposition from Democrats, a variety of groups like ACLU, Iowa, Nebraska, NAACP. Opponents criticized Iowa as the law is vague and subjective. And so, on this type of stuff, right, the ACLU is going to come out here and they're going to say, well, this is putting limitations on free speech. What happens if a teacher wants to speak about these things? And it's going to turn into a whole free speech mess. In these types of situations, I tend to think that locally is the best solution on stuff like this, so that individual schools, individual school districts, they get to decide what to do with their kids. I'll say, well done, Iowa, for standing back up to some of this stuff. Maybe there is a segment in Iowa where they do want to teach that stuff. And I don't really, have a problem with that, honestly. If parents want to send their kids to a CRT school, I guess they should have the freedom to do that, right? Just like we should say we have the freedom to send our kids to other schools. I don't have kids, by the way, so maybe I should just shut up and keep reading the story. According to Washington Post, most teachers don't specifically refer to critical race theory in the classroom, but some lessons do reflect some of its themes, such as the existence of systemic racism. So here's what the law will ban. It's going to ban teaching the ideas that the U.S. or the state of Iowa is fundamentally or systemically racist or sexist. Can't teach that an individual, by virtue of race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, either consciously or unconsciously. And they cannot teach that anyone, quote, should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of the race of one's race or sex. Okay. It will also ban any form of race or sex stereotyping or race or sex scapegoating. Race or sex stereotyping is defined as ascribing character traits. We're going to read all of that here in a minute. The measure prohibits school and college employees from discriminating against students or employees based on political ideology, along with protected characteristics outlined in federal civil rights law. School and college training must also discourage students from this kind of discrimination. All right. So the bill applies to classroom instruction, mandatory diversity training for state and local government employees. It would not ban teachers or instructors from answering questions about those concepts, and it would not prevent teachers from discussing them as part of a larger course of study. Okay. So there you go. There's a little bit of flexibility there. Iowa's new law, in parts, draws nearly word for word from a Trump administration executive order that targeted critical race theory. Joe Biden rescinded that order in January. Yeah, well, Governor Reynolds just put it right back there, Joe. So what do you think about that? Here is her signing statement here from the office of the governor. So we'll notice this came a couple days ago, June 8th. The Honorable Paul Potty, Secretary of State of Iowa, she's saying, hey, listen, I hereby transmit that House File 802, an act providing for requirements related to racism or sexism trainings and diversity, is hereby approved on this date. Signed it into law. This is what it looks like. So when we read through some of these, we're looking for really, the general framework when it comes to, legislation is, I always kind of look at the size of this thing. It's not very long. You can see this is it. We just went through the whole thing. We also can see there's sort of a definitions section here. So we have race or scapegoating means the same thing as defined elsewhere. So they're pointing us to different areas of the law. Government entity means what you think it means. Agency, so on and so forth. Let's see. Each agency prohibits, so subsection 3, each agency, entity, subdivision shall prohibit its employees from discriminating against other employees by any characteristic protected under the Civil Rights Act. It's like, why do we have to say that, Section shall not be construed to do any of the following, so don't overread it. We have a new section here. They're giving us some more definitions about race and sex scapegoating. Race or sex stereotyping. Let's see what this means. So race or sex scapegoating. What does that mean? It means assigning fault, blame, or bias to a race or sex, or to members of a race or sex because of their race or sex. Or, so that's one definition, or it's claiming that consciously or unconsciously, and by virtue of a person's race or sex, members of the race are inherently racist, or they are inherently inclined to oppress others, or that members of the race are inherently sexist or inclined to oppress others. So you can't blame, you can't assign blame, fault, or bias based on race or sex. So you can't say that anything that somebody did was a consequence of one of those things. That's white privilege, like, gone. You can't use that anymore, right? Wow, it's powerful. No more white privilege. That's a big one, because that one, the white privilege attack, it defeats a lot of arguments. Because if you say anything, they just use that to beat you over the head with it. You say, well, I think that's inappropriate. And they say, well, of course you would, because you're a white person. You grew up with white privilege. And you have no idea what it's like to be in that person's shoes. And we go, oh, I guess you're right about that. I guess we can't talk at all about anything. But this law says that they can't assign fault, blame, or bias to race or sex. So when I say to somebody, hey, I think that might be a problem, that policy issue might need a correction, and they say, that's because you're a white, I go, up, illegal. Governor, we got a lawbreaker over here accusing me of white privilege. That is in violation of the law. So good for Iowa. Now, same thing goes on with race or sex stereotyping. Means ascribing character traits or values or morals or ethical codes or privileges or statuses based on sex or race. This is the dumbest world we're living in here. I got to be honest. Now, not that this bill is dumb. It's just this idea that we have to talk about this is like insane to me. I thought it was the content of your character that was important. Now it's all about race. Like, you can't even, like, you have to tell people that they can't blame you for your opinion on your race. Okay, so this is a law now. This is in law. So that meritocracy or traits such as hard work ethic. So they're also saying, oh no. So specific defined concepts. Let's see. This includes all of the following: that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. So they're saying that you can't talk or you can't teach specific defined concepts. That an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment based on their race or sex. That individuals should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other forms of psychological distress on account of their race or sex. That meritocracy or traits like hard work ethic are racist or sexist, or were created by a particular race to oppress another race. All right, we've seen a lot of that. Like hard work and, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is somehow like a white supremacist thing. What? Any other form of race or sex scapegoating, also not allowed. Each public institution or higher education may continue that training that fosters a workplace and learning environment. However, they cannot do it unless they ensure that everybody is following the rules, is what this says. Institution diversity. All right, let's see what else we have. Race and sex stereotyping training. Each school district may continue training that fosters a workplace and learning environment that is respectful, as long as it doesn't touch on any of that prohibited conduct. We cannot prevent a school district from promoting racial, cultural, ethnic, intellectual, or academic diversity. provided such efforts are consistent. Okay, so they can, yeah. So there are some pretty nice protections in here. It says this section shall not be construed to do the following: prevent a school district from promoting racial, cultural, ethnic, intellectual diversity. It's not about anti-diversity. It's not what this is about at all. They're saying, in fact, this section shall not be construed to do any of these: inhibit or violate First Amendment rights. Right. So now we're starting to take a look at the protections of the professor, of the teacher, of the academic environment. And of course, we want to foster that. Right. You know, I went to law school, and they talk a lot about diversity in law schools, and that it fosters all of this, you know, rigorous debate, and that we have different perspectives in there. It felt like one perspective to me, that I was the problem with everything, of course. And we have liberty or death on here. He's going through the same thing right now. Prohibiting the discussing of specific defined concepts that are part of a larger course of academic instruction, right? So they're making some pretty strong limitations here as well. This was signed into law. Speaker of the House, Pat Grassley, Jake Chapman, President of the Senate, Megan Nelson, Chief Clerk, Kim Reynolds, the Governor, June 8th. So this is now in effect. And as I mentioned, you know, I don't have children, and I don't know what the school situation is like right now. I think it's probably not ideal. What do we do about it? But I am a person, and I do need medical care from time to time. And could this concept be trickling over into that industry as well? Well, according to Breitbart, certainly looks like it. So they tell us that this individual, somebody who goes by the name of Donald Moss, right? Now, Dr. Donald Moss, we're going to take a look at this fellow here in a minute, but let's see what he wrote first. He is a doctor. He is somebody who is a current faculty member of the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. He's also a part of the San Francisco Center for Psychoanalysis. Well, he wrote a peer-reviewed article entitled On Having Whiteness, which is kind of this thing that the scholarly academics do. You know, they write on something, like, you know, on infinity, on morality, whatever. Okay. Very sophisticated. If you want to be sophisticated, write an article and start the title of the article with the word on. On the problem of hierarchical male structures. On that, right? Get started. Everybody goes, oh, this article is going to be impressive. I can't wait to read it. Can you wait to read this one? Probably. Let's take a look at what's going on here. So in this journal, he published this peer-reviewed article, which means somebody else read it and said, yeah, it's good. Publish it. And probably a bunch of people read it and said, yeah, it's good. Publish it. Love it. Get it in there. So the Healthcare Journal, this guy writes, whiteness is a malignant parasitic-like condition that creates perverse appetites. So, which is all news to me. I mean, I didn't know that I was a malignant parasite or that my whiteness was parasitic, but I'm going to learn more about that right now, thanks to this gentleman's brilliance. The article's abstract says that the condition of, quote, whiteness after one acquires it, I guess in the womb, gives a person a malignant parasitic-like condition to which white people have a particular susceptibility. All right. Well, I obviously don't want this parasite. So how can I deal with this, doctor? He says he added that the condition, while, quote, being in one's body, in one's mind, and in one's world makes the host, I guess that's me, specifically target non-white people, due to their parasitic whiteness. Really? Okay. I haven't felt that. Much, but okay. He further writes, Moss writes, once established, these appetites are nearly impossible to eliminate. He went on to explain how a person could pursue treatment for the condition, which is great. All right, so if you happen to be white, let's figure out what we can do about this. He says effective treatment consists of a combination of psychic and social historical interventions. Psychic and social historical interventions. All right, well, okay, I'm not sure how to start with that, you know. All right, it says such interventions can reasonably aim to only reshape whitenesses' infiltrated appetites to reduce their intensity, redistribute their aims, and occasionally turn those aims towards the work of reparations. Okay. Yeah, so I didn't know that I had a condition. I mean, I thought, yeah, I mean, I have it. It's there. I can feel it. I definitely do have that. So I guess, what do we do? So he's talking about reparations here, so that's good. So what about reparations? Maybe this will prompt that conversation, since all the white parasitics, malignant white people can talk reparations. And, you know, to be fair about the reparations, I'd like to know what his offer is, or like what they're proposing here. What is the, like, how much are we talking? Okay, I've told you this before, but when I was on Clubhouse, they were talking about a big number in reparations. Now, I just kind of want to know what the number is. I'm just curious at what it is. If it's something reasonable, can we just kind of make this whole thing go away? If we pay, $1 billion, no more white supremacy in America anymore? Like you can't, like, that's it? Like the ledger is cleaned? What number is that? Now, the last I heard on Clubhouse, I think they were talking about 4 quadrillion, I think, which is 1,000 trillions, I think. So that one, I think, was not reasonable. You have to have a negotiating table. I'm just curious what that total number is for the reparations. I don't know what if it's reasonable, maybe we can entertain it. If it solves this problem, for crying out loud. All right, Moss wrote that the ravages wreaked by the chronic condition can function either as a warning or as a temptation. The doctor said that memorialization alone, therefore, is no guarantee against regression. He says there is not yet a permanent cure for your whiteness. So if there's not a cure, you know what happens? They just send you off to the camps. One psychologist, Dr. Philip Pellegrino, commented on the article's publication, said, "How do my colleagues consider this scholarship?" Here's what she said, right? Or he said, Dr. Philip Pellegrino, "How do my colleagues seriously consider this scholarship? Anyone actually take this seriously on having whiteness, right? Published by Donald Moss here. Here's what the abstract says from the article itself, first published May 27th. It says, whiteness is a condition one first acquires when one has a malignant, parasitic-like condition to which white people have a particular susceptibility. Condition is foundational, generating characteristics of being in one's body, in one's mind, and in one's world. Parasitic whiteness renders... Oh, sorry, one sec. All right. Once established, my device went off. Once established, these appetites are nearly impossible to eliminate. Effective treatment consists of a combination of psychic and social historical interventions. Such interventions can be reasonably aimed to reshape the whiteness's infiltrated appetites, to reduce their intensity, to redistribute their aims, and to occasionally turn those aims towards the work of reparation. When remembered and represented, the ravages wreaked by the chronic condition can function as a warning or as a temptation. There is not yet a permanent cure. So obviously, folks, this whole thing is insane. This guy's a lunatic, right? All of this talk is whacked out talk. Now, I was very jokey that last segment. I think this is reprehensible commentary. I think that this is disgusting to see out there in the world. And I think this guy should be ashamed of himself if he is serious. Now, the question is he serious or is he just trolling everybody? We're starting to see a situation here where it kind of feels like they're trying to one-up each other almost just to show, just to like get people riled up. And a lot of people are talking about this article today. I don't know if this guy actually believes it. I'd have, the rational person in me has to think that anybody in, academia would look at this and go, this guy's a lunatic, right? This is pure racism, right? People are born white. And we have a parasitic mind when we come out of the womb naturally. There's nothing we can do about that. That's insane racism. So why is he allowed to fester in academia? If these people are so enlightened and so holier than thou, and they are always following the science, why is he allowed to just bounce around, be on the board in New York and San Francisco? Probably elevated, right? Probably goes to the cocktail parties and everybody's like, oh, Dr. Donald Moss, thank you for being so insightful about how awful white people are. Tell us more of your trials and tribulations, doctor. Probably a lot of that going on. This is what the guy looks like here. So this is him from his Twitter, 644 followers. If this is his actual account, it looks like it is. 1,400 tweets here. It says the Dean, College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences, right? Which is what we talked about. Saybrook University, New book on self-care for chronic illness, integrative pathways, in Springer. So joined April 2009. Got to imagine this is the guy. And again, is he just trolling people? Like, is this a serious thing? Ordinarily, I would say this guy's just trolling, but I don't think so anymore. I think these people are actually dead serious, and I think this type of language is very serious, and it's very problematic. Joking aside, right? This guy's a doctor. He's writing all sorts of publications that other doctors are reading, been around for a long time, probably has quite a big following, probably has counseled and actually provided medical services to people. And I would love to know how many white people he's had counseling sessions with, and what the long-term prognosis is for those people. Because I can imagine sitting there and being told that you're a parasite and that you're a malignant, awful contribution to human society is not good medical treatment. And is that something that, we have all of these American medical associations and all these watchdog groups that are supposed to be these enlightened academics and these scientists, and they allow this type of stuff to go on a regular basis. Is anything going to happen to this guy, right? This is a doctor who has a certain ideological opinion that he's trying to essentially pass off as a medical article, I guess. All right, so very frustrating stuff. Now, fortunately, folks, there is some sanity out there. I want to introduce you to this guy. He's a black Ivy League professor, and this article comes over from the Daily Wire. So he writes that a truly anti-racist parent must pull their kids from a school, any school that teaches CRT. Okay. His name is John McWhorter. He's a black Columbia University linguistics professor. He's urging parents who are truly anti-racist to pull their kids out of school. He talks about Dwight Englewood School. He references it as a DE school in response to an English teacher, Dana Stengel-Plow's decision to resign from the school over allegations that it is indoctrinating students with the Marxist theory. Right. So, I mean, major hats off to these people doing excellent work. Just saying, we're out of here. Right. And speaking out. Now, this guy writes, John McWhorter writes, all hail Dana Stengel-Plow. She's resigned from Dwight Englewood, which teaches students anti-racism, that sees life as nothing but abuse of power, and teaches that cringing hostile group identity against oppression is the essence of self. Truly anti-racist parents, in the name of the love of their kids, should pull them from Dwight Englewood School as of next fall. Only this will arrest the misguided elect parishioners and their quest to forge a new reality for us all. Here's what he posted on Twitter, right? So you can see, give him a good follow and a little bit of love if you're interested in doing so. But this is what he posted, and he actually wrote an entire letter here. So posted this at this organization called Fair for All, full letter. Not going to read the whole thing, but here's what you see. This is signed off on by Dana Stengel-Plow, right? Probably female, I guess, who is resigning, and she did so. Letter of resignation to Englewood, New Jersey, June 8th. Dear Joe, copies to everybody else, head of school, board trustees, English department, everybody. Says, I became a teacher because I love people. DE has changed the way that it is. Today I'm resigning from a job I love because DE has changed in ways that undermine its mission and prevent me from holding true to my conscience as an educator. She said, I believe DE is failing our students. Over the past years, they've embraced an ideology that is damaging our students' intellectual and emotional growth. No chance of creating a true community among our diverse population. She says, I reject the hostile culture of conformity and fear that has taken hold of our school. The school's ideology requires students to see themselves not as individuals, but as representatives of a group, forcing them to adopt the status of privilege or victimhood. They must locate themselves within the oppressor or oppressed group, or some intersectional middle where they must reckon with being a part oppressor and part victim. This theory of power hierarchies is only one way of seeing the world, yet it pervades the school as the single way of seeing the world. As a result, students come to my classroom accepting this theory as a fact, that people are born with less melanin in their skin, they are oppressors, and people born with more melanin in their skin are oppressed. Men are oppressors, women are oppressed, and so on. This is the dominant and divisive ideology that is guiding our students. We hear a lot about this, folks. She says, in my classroom, I see up close how this orthodoxy hinders students, their ability to read, write, and think. She says, I teach students who recoil from a poem because it was written by a man. I teach students who approach text in search of the oppressor. I teach students who see inequities in text that have nothing to do with power. Students have internalized the message that this is the way we read and think about the world. And as a result, they fixate on power and group identity. This fixation has stunted their ability to observe and engage with the full fabric of human experience. In our literature, talk about your life. She says, in my professional opinion, the school is failing to encourage healthy habits of mind, essential for growth, such as intellectual curiosity, humility, honesty, reason, the capacity to question ideas and consider multiple perspectives. In our school, the opportunity to hear competing ideas is practically non-existent. How can students who accept a single ideology as fact learn to practice intellectual curiosity or humility or consider a competing idea they've never encountered? How can students develop higher order thinking if they're limited to the world and looking at it through a lens of group identity and power? Sadly, the school is leading many to become true believers and outspoken purveyors of a regressive and illiberal orthodoxy. Understandably, these students have found comfort in their moral certainty, and so they become rigid and closed-minded, unable or unwilling to consider alternative perspectives. These young students have no idea that the school has placed ideological blinders on them. Of course, not all students are true believers. Many pretend to agree because of the pressure to conform. I've heard from students who want to ask a question but stop for fear of offending someone. I have heard from students who don't participate. One student did not want to develop her essay for fear that it might mean she's a racist. In her fear, she stopped from thinking. This is the very definition of self-censorship. I care deeply about our students. I've tried to introduce constructive and positive views. My efforts have fallen on deaf ears. You expressed dismay, but I did not hear any follow-up from you or your other administrators. Since then, the stifling conformity has only intensified. Last fall, 2 administrators informed faculty that certain viewpoints simply would not be tolerated during our new race-explicit conversations about our new anti-racist work. They said no one would be allowed to question the orthodoxy regarding systemic racism. The message was clear. The faculty went silent in response. The reality is that fear pervades the faculty. On at least 2 separate occasions, 17 and 18, our head of school, standing in front of the auditorium, told the entire faculty, quote, he would fire us all if he could so that he could replace us all with people of color. Can you believe that? Head of the school says, I'm going to fire you all if I could, and I replace you all with people of color. This year, administrators continue to assert DE's policy that we're hiring, quote, for diversity. DE has become a workplace that is hostile towards educators solely on their immutable traits. During a recent faculty meeting, teachers were segregated by skin color. Teachers were segregated by skin color at a recent faculty meeting. Teachers who had light skin were placed into the white caucus group, and they were asked to, quote, remember that we are white and that to take responsibility for our power and privilege. DE's racial segregation of educators aimed at leading us to rethink of ourselves as oppressors. It was regressive and it was demeaning to us as individuals with our own moral compass and human agency. Will the school force racial segregation on our students next? Says, I reject essentialist, racialist thinking about myself, my colleagues, and my students. As a humanist educator, I strive to create an inclusive classroom. By embracing the dignity, the unique personality of each and every student, I want to empower all students with the skills and habits of mind they need to fulfill their potential as learners and human beings. Neither the color of my skin nor the group identity assigned to me by my DE dictates my humanist beliefs or my work as an educator. Being told that it does is offensive and wrong. It violates my dignity as a human being. My conscience does not have a color. DE claims that we teach students how to think, not what to think. Sadly, that is just no longer true. I hope administrators and board members awaken in time to prevent this misguided absolutist ideology from hollowing out DE, as it has so many other institutions. Cheers to you, Dana Stangel Plow, upper school English teacher. And damn, she's a good English teacher too. It's a nice letter. You know, I started to read that and I was like, I'm not going to read this whole thing. But it was good. Pretty good letter. Woo. Actually would have slowed down a little bit had I known it would have been so dang good. Love it. So that was Dana Stangel Plow. She's resigning. We have another professor saying, don't send your kids to that garbage school. They're trying to indoctrinate them. And that's what it's going to take, my friends. I mean, that's the only way to, I think, to address any of this stuff. Now, again, I don't have kids, so keep that in mind. All right, Want to Know says, you were right about local voting. My vote mattered a lot since only 25% voted. Some won, some lost, still run off school board elections in September in Oregon, some members within 50 votes. It definitely slowed CRT down. Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about. It's about running for these local boards. You know, here they did it at the governor's state level, but A lot of this, you're seeing people do this all across the country. You're seeing these videos come out on Twitter saying, "Stop teaching my kid that crap. I'm tired of it." And every one of them are pretty good. These lately they've been moms, it looks like, and the moms come out and they have a really rehearsed speech, and they just get their 3 minutes and they get jacked up and amped up, man, and they let it belt, let it fly. I'm like, yes, go, get it, love it. Love to see more of that, right? Tell these people, they don't know any better. The problem is that people don't get engaged with their government. If more of us were engaged with our government, we'd see a lot less incompetence. But people have their lives to live, and they've got better things to do. The bureaucrats want to go run things, and those are exactly the wrong people to be running things, right? All right, we've got Shade says, California has CRT in schools, plus other horrid things. White children are literally told they are the problem. Just terrible things are being pushed onto them now. Why would you put your kids in school? I mean, honestly, I feel terrible for parents that are listening to this and like, my kid's in public school. Going, really? Like, I feel terrible that I have to come out here and do a show. I'm sure somebody's watching this with kids going, I have no choice but to send my kid to public schools. What do you do about that? I think, as a parent, you just make sure when they come home, do a little deprogramming, as it were. All right, Speech Unleashed says, what needs to happen is for parents to be more involved in what is being taught to their children. With remote learning, parents finally started paying attention to local school boards. Parents need to continue doing this because indoctrination starts with the young. The quicker the parents do this, the quicker CRT is abolished in all sectors, including businesses. And I noticed that too, right? A lot of parents were sort of sitting in the same room with their kid on Zoom, and the kid's 12 years old, and a professor comes out and says, hey, hey, racist little Susie over there, what are you doing with your white privilege? Get back over here and pay attention, okay? Right? And dad goes, what? What did they say? Tells mom. Mom goes down to the school board PTA meeting and lets it fly. Love it. Sharon Quidney says, juxtapose this comment with my previous one. Here, we see racial discrimination aimed primarily at whites, but including Jews and Asians as well. This is the core of CRT. All you have to do is connect the dots and take a backward look at Germany a little less than 100 years ago. Ugh. So if you missed the first segment, Sharon's been here for the entirety of the show. We clipped these up into different segments. If you're only watching this segment, the first segment, we talked about Deutsche Bank and inflation. So she's taken us back to that story. Germany, rewind back 100 years. Deutsche Bank was founded in 1870. We know where that went. Uh-oh. Not good there, Sharon. But it's an astute observation, that's for sure. Nadarb says, the problem is the left isn't using critical race theory as a theory. They are teaching people to use it as a general guideline. Yeah, it's critical race fact is how they're framing it, right? For everyday life. And that's why there is such a big problem, they say. It brings nothing but anxiety and paranoia to these young folks out here who buy into the lifestyle. Yeah. Yeah, they do. It's sort of fact. And I've been in conversations with people about this. They don't go very well. Actually, well, we're going to leave that one alone. Yeah, I was going to tell you what happened with one of those relationships, but don't want to get into that story. All right. Ed Green here says, critical race theory. How are these states' CRT bans going to enforce these bans? How will they monitor for compliance? What are the non-compliance consequences? We need laws to improve transparency in education so that parents and society know what kids are being taught. Indoctrination occurs behind closed doors. Yeah, it's a great point there, Ed. And I think this is probably, you're going to see a bunch of lawsuits around this. All this stuff is going to go into effect, but, at some point, somebody's going to file a lawsuit if they haven't already. And it's probably going to come down to enforcement, right? What happens if somebody starts talking about one of these concepts and a school administrator says, no, you crossed the line there. And they say, no, I didn't. The law says this, and I was talking about it in the bigger context, but I think racism is a part of that bigger context. And so I'm not, in fact, violating the law. I'm talking about something according to, my contract that I signed when I hired here, when I got my job as a teacher here, and my, rotten teachers union that's going to be fighting for me every step of the way. Then I have the freedom to go do these certain things, and I can run my curriculum my way. You already agreed to that. Now you pass this new law on top of an agreement we already made. We have a conflict of laws. I want to teach this according to my contract and the curriculum that I think is appropriate. The governor just slapped a new series of regulations on top of me. I'm going to go to my union that doesn't want me to work or teach the kids anyways because of COVID, and they're going to file a lawsuit probably with the ACLU. They're going to take that up, and then the courts are going to have to sort all of this out. So it's a big it's going to be a big mess is really what it's going to come down to. But I agree with your second point here that I think transparency is important. I think choice is important, right? If we had more choice, then who cares about what any particular school is teaching? Because you just say, hey, Johnny, what they teach you at school today? I learned that all white people are the problem. And you say, oh, well, that sounds terrible. That's not reality. So Johnny, I'm going to take you out of school A. We're going right over there to school B. And guess what? That happens pretty quickly. Suddenly school A says, yeah, that's really not in alignment with what our community wants. So we just sort of use competition and say, well, that curriculum is in alignment with my religion, with my values, my ideals, and I'm going to move my children over there. But we don't have that right now. So now we have a situation where the governor really has no choice but to come down and implement a blanket policy that slaps everybody down. And I don't necessarily like that, right? I'm not somebody who thinks that the government should be telling us what to do one way or the other. If one parent wants to send their kid to a CRT school and they want to indoctrinate that kid and think that that's the best methodology for that kid in America, go for it. I totally disagree with that. I think that this entire concept really, hamstrings kids. And I've talked about this before. It breaks my heart thinking about, 8-year-olds waking up thinking that every moment that they're walking around the mall or the park or Disneyland, that they are in this environment where they are the victims, and that every single white person, who's in that Mickey costume? Is that a white guy or a black guy, right? Am I going to get attacked by Mickey or should I give him a hug? Because of what they are teaching people. Like, what a horrible world to live in. Way to rob a 12-year-old or 14-year-old of any enjoyable, facet of life by just telling them that they are a victim at the first step. And you think about this just with kids in general or people in general. If you tell somebody that they're terrible at everything, that they're a victim, that everything is oppressive to them, they're going to start acting in conformity with that position, right? With that belief. And it just makes it impossible for them to succeed, which is a huge problem. That's why we tell kids, you can be president, you can be an astronaut, you can fly to the moon if you want to, do whatever, you have skills, you can achieve great things in this world. And nobody can stop you, little Johnny. Work hard, do well, don't do drugs, stay in school. You'll have some success in America. But now we turn around to little Johnny and say, oh no, you're a huge part of the problem. Everything that you're doing here is oppressive. And we tell, the non-white kid that they're the victim of all of Johnny's actions. And you just go, all right, so if we had a choice, we just say, we're pulling our kids out of that school. They're going to a better school. You can wither away and die. All right. Want to Know says there is a lot of the Bernie philosophy out there. It's in Florida and Texas. My mom calls it the ME generation. What can you do for me? I like that. Yeah, so it's not like millennials. It's like the me generation. I like that. We have I'm Not Gas says, I've never seen a parasitic species that hosts specifically seek out to live among. Yeah, it's kind of, it is weird. Yeah, it is weird, right? So I was trying to sort of tease this out a little bit. It's really complicated because there's I think a lot of unity between these two things. Like I actually see black people and white people getting along together from time to time. It's a bizarre scene. I mean, if you've never seen it, wow. It actually happens in America regularly. People go to business meetings, they go to lunch, they're not killing each other in racial animosity in this country. I know it's hard to believe that, but it actually does happen. And so I'm trying to sort of conflate the two. If white people are such parasitic, malignant monsters, why are we getting along so well if we're just leeching off of all of the energy of the host? I don't know. It's confusing, but I'm not a medical doctor. He is. I'm a juris doctor, which is obviously not qualified to opine on anything involving racism in America, especially because I'm white as well. It's a huge problem. Huge problem. Want to Know says, how do you cure this condition? Give them everything you own. Would that do it? Or should one borrow to get more money to give them? Well, that's what I want to know. I mean, I just want to know what the number is. Not because I think that we should, do reparations. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm just curious, right? Sometimes you go on the website and you look up that car, you're like, whoa, okay. Maybe that is doable actually. Maybe I can make that work. I just like to know, right? What does that trip cost? Okay. That's pretty reasonable. If you can knock that down a little bit, then maybe we can make this work. So I'm just curious what the reparations number is. And quite frankly, I'm not really sure who to talk to about that. If I knew who to talk to and who is responsible for that decision, maybe we could get some a head start on this. Is it Obama? Is it Al Sharpton? Is it the George Floyd family? I don't know who to talk to about any of these issues, but I'm open to the conversation. I'm a problem-oriented, I'm a problem-solution-oriented person. It's been a long week, folks. Sharon says, okay, and you can put this down with the other two. This is the same rhetoric and even vocabulary used by dear Uncle A.H. in the last century. Oh, no. Oh, no, Uncle A.H. We're talking about Deutsche Bank. We're talking about indoctrination. We're talking about Uncle A.H. Oh, gosh, the show. It's going. We're snowballing fast, my friends. All right, Jeremy here says, in my opinion, racism is a perverse, man-made behavior, and the people pushing anti-white is no better than anyone else. There is one race, the human race. CRT is perpetuating racism, not making it better. Honestly, I don't think this guy deserves much attention. He's clearly out of his mind. That's a good point, Jeremy. Yeah, he might just be crazy, right? It might just be crazy old, what was it? Moss. Crazy old Dr. Moss. He's just writing in there again. Are you going to publish? Remember in The Office where they give Creed Bratton the Creed thoughts? They just set up a Word file and they're like, here's your blog. Just put everything into this Word file on your computer so the internet doesn't see it. Maybe that's what they're doing with Dr. Moss, except this one got out and we're all reading it. Sharon says, he is not trolling. Just look at that number with the hate speech at Yale the other day. That person with the hate speech. Yeah. There are a number of other examples that have cropped up lately. Moss needs to lose his license. Where is the class action lawsuit? Yeah, where is the AMA? Where is the American Medical Association? This guy is actually telling people that they are parasites. Is that clinical psychology? I'm not a psychologist, but is that in the DSM-5 that they use for clinical diagnoses? Whiteness, parasitic, malignant condition? Is he following, accepted medical practice? I don't think so, but I don't know. Who knows? It's very, very complicated. Tremendous is here, says this kind of nonsense makes no sense to me. If you're trying to improve race relations by telling people you're trying to convince things need to improve, that they're evil, doesn't work. It makes me feel like, okay, I'm evil, so there's no hope for me because it's my whiteness that makes me evil. So why even try to improve? What's the point? You can't get rid of it. It's still there. I'm stuck with it. Probably. I don't know if we can change that in the near future. Not that I would want to, not that anybody should want to, because I don't think it's a problem. All right. Now, Jeremy says, I think this guy has been given too many titles and become self-important and uncontested for so long, he believes the garbage he's coming up with. A similar phenomenon is when you think you are a great singer and everyone tells you that you're good. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good analogy there, Jeremy. And I think also that, this type of stuff, it's like Britney Spears. Okay. Now, not anything recent, because that's a whole separate can of worms that we're not getting into. But remember when she was sort of young and a teenager, remember she was always kind of doing like one outrageous thing after another. I was a kid. I was like, in love with her. And every time she did something crazy, it was like always a little bit more crazy than the last time. We see this with a lot of celebrities and a lot of people in general. They want to get attention. And so they're constantly escalating their rhetoric because everybody's tired of your old shtick. We already heard your speech on white privilege. Okay. Everybody's saying white privilege now. So we get that. That's boring. It's bland. There's books about it. We've heard it enough. So this guy goes, I need to come up with something. I know. Parasites. Malignant parasites. That's the ticket. I'm going to write a whole paper about it. Watch what this does to the internet. Right. So it could be something like that. Edon Tess says, how do we calculate reparations to people who are not directly harmed? That's a good question. He says, if we are using the original promise of 40 acres and a mule, okay, we can calculate this, which is, oh gosh, I'm liking where this is going. In 1862, there were between 20,000 and 50,000 slaves freed. Take the most favorable number of 50,000. Okay. So 50,000 times 40 acres. So we'll say a 2 million an acre times an average of 947 an acre, which is 18,940 million. You'll have Faith calculate the cost of a mule. There you go, solved. So my math was all over the place, but hard to research and write in here in real time. Mule in 1867 is 66.97. So times 50,000, So it's 3.3 million, grand total 22 million. Okay, so that's a great number, by the way. Thank you for that. And so now so that sounds like that might be an 1867 number. So now let's add that up to it. Like, let's adjust that for inflation, and we can add in some punitive damages if you want. So 22 million, let's say 22 million in 1867. Let's say inflation was, 3-4 times that. So we're going to multiply that by 4. Gives us about $100 million. Let's add another punitive damages of another $100 million. $200 million? Folks, that's like a rounding error. That's like tip money. They spend that in toilet paper in a month in Congress. A lot of excrement there. So sounds like it's pretty doable, according to Edon Tess. Now, that's a different number than what I had heard previously. So there was another room in Clubhouse about 4 months ago where they were talking about the reparations number. They were having a serious conversation about this. And their numbers were a little bit different. You're about 22 million. There was number that was about 4 quadrillion, which I think is for 1,000 trillions, which is a lot. So we've got a little bit of room to make up here, 22 million, 4 quadrillion. But it's a start. That's all I was looking for. So thank you for that. Speech Unleashed says, resignation is the wrong strategy to change things, to be honest. These teachers need to use the same tactics that are used against them. They need to say they are being forced to teach CTR is discrimination against them. And that's a good point, actually, Speech. I think that's a very pertinent point, right? The teachers here, I think, are at a major disadvantage because it is a David versus Goliath situation. They have the schools, which are obviously indoctrinated. They want to go one particular direction. They're ideological. They're not educational anymore. They have a particular outcome in mind. They want to see society changed. They're going to be a part of that revolution by teaching the students. They know that they have them captive and they can do essentially whatever they want with them because most parents are just out to lunch, right? They are doing whatever they think is best for them and their families, and they're trusting that the government is taking care of their children. Unfortunately, they don't know what's really going on. So if we're in a situation like this where you have the entire school industry, and then you have the teachers who are all beholden to a union, and the union now is going to essentially do what doesn't jeopardize their continual position. The majority of teachers, it sounds like, are sort of going in this direction, or at least accepting it. And so the unions are not going to fight for the teachers who are resigning in protest. The unions will back the teachers who maybe would get terminated if they didn't follow the CRT teachings, but not the people, or maybe this woman doesn't have a union. Maybe this is a private school and this is a whole separate issue. But my point still stands, I think, that if a teacher is not going to go in lockstep, they're going to be out on their own. So what are they supposed to do? In my opinion, I think a real good solution would be somebody starts a legal fund for these people, right? And she does exactly what you said. She sticks by her guns. She says, I'm not teaching that garbage. And if you want me to go and participate in this segregation faculty meeting and you want to call me somebody who's a part of the White Caucus, I'm not participating. What you're doing is discriminatory. It's in violation of the Civil Rights Act. It's racial discrimination. It's sex discrimination. And I'm not standing for it. And I'm going to continue to work, force you to fire me, which they will inevitably do. Then they'll get slapped with a lawsuit, right? But the teachers need to have a lot of funds, a lot of resources and expertise in order to do that, which I think that is probably beyond most of them. And if I were somebody who practiced in civil law and had more experience in that space and employment law and teachers unions and government contracts and all that stuff, maybe that would be a project I'd be interested in. But I'm sure that there are other lawyers out there who would be interested in spearheading something like that, or at least doing work on this, because that is different. Resigning is sort of ceding the ground to them. Filing a lawsuit is a whole different ballgame. And I think as these conversations continue to develop, we're going to see more and more of that. We're seeing people with a lot of funding, like Project Veritas. I think he's backed by the Mercers or somebody like that, billionaires who just say, here, whatever you need, just go continue to fight your war. Go. Right? You need $1 million for a lawsuit against the New York Times? No problem. Here you go. Go get it. Right? Because they're going to get it on the back end in fundraising and political victories that will then trickle back down to their benefit. So love the idea of using litigation to take the stands when the stands are appropriate, not to be, filing frivolous lawsuits by any stretch of the imagination, but stuff that is legally right and morally appropriate, I think would be the right tactic. All right, next up, we got No Doubt says the parents of one Texas school district submitted a FOIA request to the district on CRT materials that were taught and then used the results to flip the school board in the next election. I think I saw that story. Don't think we covered that here, No Doubt, but I did see that story. And there was another story where the parents, I think, seized the school board because they knew the Roberts Rules of Orders for meetings. So what happened was, I think that they were going to come and protest, something. And the school board said, oh, we're just not holding a meeting then, right? We're not going to show up. So the school board didn't show up, just sort of abandoned ship because they knew that they were going to get scolded by all these parents. Well, the people there said, well, today's the time and place for the meeting. It's a scheduled meeting. It's a stated meeting. It's supposed to happen at this time. There's nobody here. So the rules say when nobody's here, we get to just kind of vote on people who are going to come in and fill their seats. Let's do it. Voted everybody in. They took the seats, elected themselves, threw out the old board, passed anti-CRT legislation. I think that was the gist of an article I read, which is hilarious. It's just great. We have Davis Park says, is segregating professors by race unconstitutional by the Brown versus Board precedent? I don't get how this works. I don't either, man. I don't know. I thought we had all of these rules in place that you can't do that type of stuff, right? We used to have the white people get that drinking fountain and the black people got that drinking fountain. You got to sit over here when you're waiting for your tire to get changed, and you get to sit over here. But, that was separate but equal. Remember that whole system that we went through in this country? That our Supreme Court said originally that's okay and then not so good anymore. And now we're sort of going back to that. So I don't get it either, my friend. Brown versus Board precedent. I don't know if they could. I don't know if they could do that for their own faculty. Those are. It's a whole separate can of worms. Like this is an employment situation now between an employee and an employer. And in my opinion, it's probably going to be closer to employment discrimination or something. The whole thing is ripe for a lot of litigation. We talked about Iowa passing this new bill. They're going to be faced with a ton of lawsuits, and they know that going into this, I'm sure. All right, next up, No Doubt says reparations have already been paid through the Civil Rights Act and affirmative action programs of the 1960s, and they continue through today. I think you could easily make that argument, right? We do have a very, very robust social welfare state in this country. I think you can make the argument for that, but I don't think that's quite what the pro-reparations people are looking for. All right, next up, we've got Nadarb says, if I was a parent, I would be demanding a live stream of every single one of my kids' classes every day so that I could access and check in throughout the day. I think that's probably something more parents are interested in. Speech says taxes pay for public school education system. Taxes should not be used to pay for teaching discrimination like CRT. So absolutely no public school should be allowed to teach CRT. If private schools wants to, then you can argue they should be allowed to, but not with the school, not with taxpayer dollars. Yeah. Or if you're going to use taxpayer dollars, let's say to support the students, you give them the choice, right? So like if we're going to give everybody here $1,000 for your kids' education, go do whatever you want with that. Yeah, I have to think about that. All right, so next up we got Pinky says, Rob, you don't have a condition. The corruption in this world runs deep. Thanks, Pinky. I'm looking at you here. You don't have a condition either, dear. You are beautiful just the way you are, as is everybody. This racism is garbage. It's just garbage. And I think it's ultimately going to be seen for what it is. I think long-term, this type of ideology, living this way, living like you are a constant victim, living like you are being oppressed everywhere you go, and living like you are an oppressor, they mute you. Just that's really what this is all about. It just mutes everybody. And it makes people more volatile and more angry against each other. And that is not a good way to live your life. Those people are not going to be effective. And it's sad for them. It's sad for those kids who are going through that world, going through that education. They're going to be less effective as people, less effective as business owners, as doctors, as lawyers, astronauts, presidents, or whatever they decide to do, whether it's, welders and plumbing and teaching and all of these other professions that are outstanding. But they don't function if every time you walk into your classroom or every time when I was digging ditches, I go out there and I work with my colleagues, many of whom were not white. We don't go out there digging ditches in 116 degrees, screaming at each other over about our origins and about who should swing the pick harder than the next guy and about why I should take over their bird. It doesn't work like that, right? So if I show up on that job site and I start, talking victim, oppressor, oppressee, all this garbage, do you know what happens at that job site? Everybody goes, "You're whacked, bro. We're not going to work with you." And that person gets rooted out of the system. They're going to see a lot of failures time and time again, living in that ideology, or they're only going to succeed in their own silo that lives and or operates that way. Okay, the productive people in society, even if this stuff is being taught in schools, even if the government is cramming this down your throats, the people who really are the gears of the world, they're not going to accept that. So, let them have their little fun over there in their little bizarre world where everything is racist and everything is broken. The other people who really want to live our lives and go find some purpose and create a mission and go and achieve that and believe that we can do something great on this planet with our time here, we're going to go over here. They, the CRT people, they can go spend time over there with themselves and just bicker about who the bigger victim is. I don't want a part of it. I know you don't either, which is why you're here and you're there at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And we love you. We love your support. Thank you so much for it. All right. And we're going to change gears now. Last segment of the day, long show. We've got a bad Popo we got to talk about. Been a little bit of time since we've talked about some bad Popo, but we've got one coming out of Arkansas. In fact, this is a pretty bad one. Now, nobody dies in this one. There's no blood or guts or anything like that. Thankfully, unfortunately, that is not always the case. But we do have a situation where a pregnant woman was driving her car on the way home. And when she's driving, you're going to notice that an officer kind of pulls up behind her and he's following around and he wants to conduct a traffic stop. You're going to notice what happens as soon as this traffic stop starts, that we see maybe her blinker come on or maybe her hazardous lights come on. We see the officer turn on his flashlight so he can kind of see what's going on. And then something kind of just goes wrong from there. We're going to show you what happened. Before we do, let's get some background on what's going on here because this is coming out of Arkansas. And the woman is suing Arkansas for some serious damages. We're going to take a look at the lawsuit. It's 23 pages long. We're not going to go through all of that, but I want to give you some background on what is happening here. So let's go over to lawandcrime.com. It says police are sued after an officer flipped a pregnant woman's car for not pulling over fast enough, right? And we have a video of this, so we're going to take a look at. So she's from Arkansas, and the officer who attempted to pull her over used a dangerous called pursuit intervention technique, okay, called a PIT. And why did he stop her? For speeding, right? This was the charge. Now, the woman is suing them for negligence, excessive force, and assault, and you can be the judge of what this looks like. Now, in my opinion, this is an actual serious crime. This woman is suing in civil court. We'll see if this officer gets charged. Looks like not going to happen, at least now. The officer claimed that he used this maneuver because the woman, who was 2 months pregnant at the time, did not pull over her car quickly enough. The plaintiff says the dash cam video shows that she reduced her speed, turned her hazard lights on before the officer rammed her vehicle. So briefly, I'm going to read the article. I'll show you the video, but she's driving down and the officer just comes up and gives her that little tap that you see in the high-speed chases. And you give that vehicle a little tap there, a little bump on the back of the vehicle, it sort of fishtails out, and it's difficult for most drivers to correct that. They end up crashing, which is exactly what happened here. Actually, it was worse than that because this woman's car flipped. All right, so let's go back to the story. In the lawsuit, it's filed mid-May in a Pulaski County Circuit Court, claims that Senior Corporal Rodney Dunn willfully and wantonly engaged in extreme and outrageous conduct. He rammed Nicole Harper's car, causing severe bodily injuries. This happened July 9th, 2020, so almost a full year ago. 23-page complaint. She was driving home. Dunn allegedly clocked her going 84 miles per hour in a 70 mile per hour speed limit. Okay. 14 over. Going 84 on a freeway. This wasn't like a woman was going 35 down the neighborhood. Okay. Going about 70 mile an hour speed limit. Very fast. And the violation here was speeding. 14 over. Okay. So this is not a woman who's fleeing with drugs. This is not somebody with guns who's a danger to community, not even a suspicion of DUI. This is just a speeding ticket. Let's see what happens. Now, Harper's attorneys say that dash cam footage of the incident shows that within seconds of Dunn turning his lights on, Harper slowed down, pulled to the right lane of the 3-lane highway. But the complaint further alleges that due to the reduced shoulder on the side of the road, she could not safely pull over. So she turned on her hazard lights, continued driving in the right lane at 60 miles per hour, looking for an area to safely stop the car. All sounds extremely reasonable, but there were no exits or shoulder for her to get off at. So after about 2 minutes and 7 seconds, the officer conducted a pit maneuver. He used his Arkansas State Police Patrol cruiser with his overhead lights on to flip her vehicle, according to the complaint. We see here, after the pit maneuver caused the car to flip, the footage shows the officer pulling up to the wreckage and then approaching the vehicle on foot, knocking on the driver's side window and asking if she can get out of the car. He says, "Why didn't you stop?" She said, "Because I didn't feel like it was safe." And he says, "Well, this is where you ended up." Harper said, "I thought it would be safe to wait until the exit," which Dunn replied, "No, ma'am. You pull over when law enforcement stops you." According to the Arkansas Driver's License Study Guide, drivers being pulled over by law enforcement are directed to pull to the nearest, safest spot out of the traffic lane. Later in the conversation, Dunn can be heard telling Harper that the incident could have been avoided, saying all you had to do was slow down. She says, "I did slow down. I turned on my hazards. I thought I was doing the right thing," Harper responded. In the lawsuit, Harper accuses Dunn of negligence, assault, battery, extreme and outrageous conduct, excessive force, malicious prosecution. The latter claim stems from Dunn charging Harper with one count of failure to yield to an emergency vehicle. He charges her with a crime, my friends, alleging there was no probable cause for such a charge, carrying a fine of $400. The suit also named defendants her supervisor, State Police Director William Bryant. The individual seeks damages in excess of $100,000, which is cheap. Somebody tell that attorney to raise that price. $100,000? Watch this. You tell me what you think. Reach for comment. Harper's legal team at Denton and Zachary PLLC simply said the video speaks for itself. I know it does. So raise that money. Oh my gosh, $100,000? Gosh, it should be $100,000 in punitive damages. All right, you tell me what this is worth. Let's take a look. This is the dash cam footage. This is Nicole Harper driving down a freeway. Okay, it's a big freeway. It's in Arkansas. It's got 3 lanes, shoulder there on the right. Watch what happens next. See, the hazards are flashing. Uh-oh. 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 Don't do it. Don't. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't. Nope. There it is. Oh, no, there it is. For a speeding ticket, folks. Speeding. Okay, well, just turn around now. I just wrecked that person's car. Okay, so they flipped over. Speeding ticket. Okay, so he just called for EMS. He said, hey, let's get EMS started. He just called for it right now. This other car stopped. Pregnant Nicole's. Now listen.
Got the number 3 lane shut down.
Number 3 lane shut down, he said. So Nicole, pregnant, just laying there. Airbag deployed. Officer gets out. Huh.
Can you get out? Come on out. Come out this way right here. Come out this way. Can you come out? Yeah. Hold on a minute. Can you get out your passenger door?
So the audio is super low here. So you probably can't hear it, but everything I just read is what they're talking about. No, no, ma'am, you pull over.
Well, this is where you ended up. Watch your head. Can you come out this way? I got plenty of room right here. Are you the only one in the vehicle? Yes. Okay. Well, ma'am, you've got to pull over when we stop. It doesn't matter, ma'am. Come on out. I've got an ambulance coming for you. You need help? Hey, Sheila. Come on, can you come out? Okay. I got an ambulance coming.
Can you try to like make the seat lean back?
I did. I pushed it back as far as it would go. Because it was lifted up. It's as far as it'll go back.
Oh my gosh.
Am all you have to know, she's got blood all over.
All right, so you get the gist of it. You know, the audio is low. I'm not sure how much of that you heard, but you heard what I read previously. The guy just, you know, almost killed that woman. I mean, was that not assault with a deadly weapon? She had her hazards on, which means I was slowing down. Well, let's take a look at what Arkansas says, right? Because we saw that they have their own driver's license guide, like many different states do. Volume 1, Edition 8. This is posted on January 18th. Let's take a look at what this says. What to do when you are stopped by a law enforcement officer. Hey, we're going to be talking about this, by the way, on Saturday. If you want to register for our law enforcement interaction training, that is available for all subscribers over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. But in Arkansas, here's what they're saying. What to do when you are stopped. Here are the steps that you should take. Pull over to the right side of the road. Activate your turn signal or your emergency flashers to indicate to the officer that you are seeking a safe place to stop. So if you have your emergency flashers on, the police should know that it is indicating to them you are seeking a safe place to stop. Yep, I see you, I hear you, I know you're there, turning it on, I'm going to be looking for a place to stop. I'm communicating to you. Pretty nice, pretty easy way to do it. Pretty convenient that cars have hazard lights on for that version of communication, right? If you are unsure if you're being stopped, pull over, call 911, make sure that they confirm it is an actual officer. Good advice on that. Number 3, pull to the nearest safest spot out of the traffic lane. Do not stop on bridges or overpasses. Okay, so between numbers 1 and number 3 here, she did exactly the right thing. Exactly the right thing. Turned on her hazards, slowed down, and pulled to the nearest safest spot out of the traffic lane. Well, she was trying to do that, was probably going to do that as soon as she got off at the next exit until maniac lunatic officer decided that he was going to assault her with his vehicle, almost killing her and her unborn child. So that's great. Now, they are suing for some reason only $100,000. Probably should be about 10 times that in my opinion. But now we have Janice Nicole Harper suing everybody from Arkansas. Comes now the plaintiff introduction. The action arises out of a negligently performed PIT, a pit maneuver, which resulted in the accident that we just saw. Now let's see, they're looking for damages. They're saying this is a federal claim, 14th Amendment violation of the Constitution, unconstitutional treatment of plaintiff during the traffic stop in question. No question, absolutely unreasonable behavior. 9 p.m., she was driving home, allegedly 84 and a 70. This is 4 seconds. Within 4 seconds of him turning on his overhead lights, she turned on her blinker, dropped her speed to 60, and moved into the right lane. So 3 things to confirm that she understood that. Plaintiff was unable to safely stop her vehicle on the right side. There were concrete barriers there. They reduced the shoulder on both sides of the road, leaving plaintiff with no room to safely pull over her car. Within 14 seconds of turning on his overhead lights, he floored his patrol cruiser to get less than a car length away. And within 15 seconds of initiating, acted the emergency flashers to indicate that she was seeking a safe place to stop. 19 seconds initiated his siren. There were no exits or shoulders to exit upon. And then about 2 minutes and 7 seconds after Dunn initiated, which caused the plaintiff's vehicle to flip, right? So that's a fairly long time for an officer, right? So 2 minutes and 7 seconds. Does that justify what he did? Many people would say it does. Hey, it was 2 minutes. You know, what's he supposed to wait? Like 3 or 4 minutes? That's ridiculous. He's a police officer. He's got other things to do. He's a very busy man. So like 2 minutes and 7 seconds, that's like way too long. You should pull over immediately. And if you don't, there are repercussions coming for you. There are people who think that way. So maybe you find yourself in that camp. Once a defendant Dunn initiated the overhead lights on his patrol cruiser, she reduced her speed well below 70, looked for a safe spot to park, but he performed a negligent PIT. Upon information and belief, we're going to be suing everybody for everything. Plaintiff has a direct cause of action due to the negligence. Here are the causes of action. So direct and vicarious liability for everybody. Let's see what's going on here. He had a direct, non-affirmative, non-delegable duty to ensure that the officer is not a maniac. So the supervisor is liable because he hired a lunatic who is assaulting people with his police vehicle. Defendant Dunn's supervisor, Johnson, is also, sort of negligent for being closely connected to him. Defendant Dunn is also negligent, of course, because he was the driver. We have Johnson, Arkansas State Police, another Johnson. They willful and wanton in their conduct, so they're just suing everybody. We have negligence of the actual officer. So they're saying that he failed to properly and safely execute the pit maneuver, failed to obey the rules of the road in violation of the common law in Arkansas, failed to exercise the requisite degree of care that an ordinary prudent person would under the same circumstances, and he failed to operate his motor vehicle in a way to avoid potentially injuring or killing somebody. Right? It's foreseeable that the failure of Dunn while in the scope of his work, blah, blah, blah. As a direct result, she suffered some serious injuries. So assault, right? So now they're saying that this is assault. She suffered injuries that were inflicted while she was not a threat to anybody. What he did was absolutely, immediately harmful. Let's see what else. They say that this constituted an intentional attempt to do injury to the plaintiff. We have a battery charge here, count 4 here, battery. So, they're going through and they're just listing out all the different causes of action. Battery in the third degree, that the contact, that basically, batteries, the sort of the physical touch by using his car to hit her car, she suffered damages. Also says mental anguish, humiliation, embarrassment. Let's see what else. Very long complaint. We're going to fly through some of this. Count 3, violation of the U.S. Code. Count 9, actually, 14th Amendment. So this is going to be an equal protection type of a claim, probably. Let's see here. Probable cause, deliberate indifference. Here we go. We got damages now. Let's see what she wants damages for, because she's only asking for $100,000. My goodness. For something like this. So she wants the permanency of her injuries, right? You need more money than that to recover from your injuries. The full extent of the injuries she sustained, the expense of the medical care, the treatment, a new car, transportation, lodging expenses, reason like time off of work. And how about this? Pain, suffering, embarrassment, humiliation, mental anguish, loss of enjoyment of her life. They call them hedonic damages, visible results of scarring or disfigurement, value of any lost earnings, personal property loss, consequential damages, right? And now what they're saying is it also is warrantive of punitive damages. They want to punish the defendant for his reckless, malicious, knowing, and intentional acts. He was reckless, malicious, and he acted deliberately, knowing that he could and would probably injure and damage the plaintiff. So punitive damages, they say, are needed to punish the defendant and deter the defendant and other similarly situated individuals from similar conduct in the future. Yeah, why not? So they want a jury trial, and they want $100,000 award, joint and several judgment. They want interest on that. They want attorney's fees. Andrew Payne Norwood. So DentonandZachary.com. Yeah, so I don't know what civil law, how that works in Arkansas, but $100,000. Bump those up. Get those numbers up. All right, let's see what's going on at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Says, depends on the state. In Florida, you must immediately pull over. So attempting to go to a safer place is a matter of rolling the dice on the police response. Interesting. Yeah, so, this is part of the problem with how this stuff works is laws are very different in different places. People come to Arizona all the time. We have criminal speeding in Arizona, a little public service announcement. So if you're going in any speed over 85 in our state, criminal. Even if the posted speed limit is 75, happens all the time. One of the most common criminal offenses that we see at our office, in fact, is criminal speeding. And it's because people, travel all through Arizona all the time to get through to California, to go visit the Grand Canyon. We have a lot of foreign people from around the world who come here to go see that thing. And they go a little bit fast because it's out in the middle of nowhere. And it's very easy to get going fast. It's 75 everywhere. So if you're going 86 and everybody else is going, well over 75, automatically criminal. It's a big deal. So when I try to communicate to people about how to respond to the police or how to deal with law enforcement, got to keep that in mind. Rules are different everywhere you go. Sometimes it catches people off guard. We're going to talk about that on Saturday. We've got Speech Unleashed says, I was taught in driver's education that it was okay and legal to put my hazards on and slow down to signal I realized the officer was wanting me to pull over, but that I could wait to pull over until I was in a lit environment where I felt safe. Well, that just makes sense. I mean, even if you're in Florida and you have to pull over immediately, and somebody turns their hazards on and they slow down and they get into the right lane, I mean, to me, it feels compliant, right? They're okay. If they start, like, at least you wait until the next exit, right? If they skip that exit, then you go, okay, well, kind of have a problem here. I'm going to call in some backup, tell somebody to get on the freeway before me, get in front of the car, get behind. We'll start, communicating verbally, not just ramming somebody with your car. One man's opinion, though. We got Nadarb says, whoa, now, Robert. This is my town you're speaking on. Let me remind you that the Arkansas State Police was also part of Governor Bill Clinton's ECIA, the elite cocaine import agency. So you already know their integrity is immaculate and cannot be questioned. She says, LOL, just K. And Nadarb says, LOL, JK, just screw them up. Screw that cop. Lock them up. I like it. And thank you, Nadarb, for that. Yeah, so hopefully I didn't offend any Arkansans? Arkansanians? I think we call ourselves Arizonans or Phoenicians, which is the really kind of the bougie term. I'm a Phoenician. Okay. We have a resort here. We have a whole hotel here named The Phoenician. It's very fancy. It's a nice spot, actually. All right. We've got Davis Parks says, this cop is such a moron. There are two options. One, follow the car until she stops and risk, something. Or two, stop the car with a dangerous pit maneuver, causing lots of medical bills, automobiles, taking other officers away from more important things. Clearly, option two is the right one here. Major facepalm. Yeah, I know. It's like, what? What did you do that for? You could have waited another minute, at least seen if she got off at the next exit. Okay. Want to know says, okay, so you would sue for at least $1 million? Nice cut. No, it'd be way more than that. I mean, at least $1 million. Yeah, you said at least $1 million. Yeah, at least $1 million. Look, if George Floyd and his family got $27 million, $100,000 is a little bit low for that. Not that, she wasn't killed in a nationwide spectacle, but the whole thing, political spectacle, the killing was not a spectacle. Let me be clear about that. The aftermath was the spectacle. So she doesn't have that same level of spotlight on her in this case, but certainly more than 100,000. She doesn't have $27 million worth of spotlight, but definitely more than 100, I would think. Nadarb says, the law here says that doing that maneuver over the speed of 45 is okay if deadly force can be applied. So in order for this to be okay, he should have been able to shoot and be justified. Wow. Oh my gosh, that's a great point, Nadarb. Love that. Thank you for that. That's a great point, right? So what are the deadly force protocols? So I was being flippant about this earlier today on Twitter, but yeah, I said actually aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. If anybody else did this, if a private person did this to somebody else, absolutely aggravated assault with a deadly weapon all day. If somebody died, right, it's vehicular manslaughter or attempted murder, really. Theoretically, this could be an attempted murder charge. So at that, if you're going to be doing that analysis, if the government is going to be prosecuting this guy, which as far as I can tell, they're not, you'd have to do an analysis on that basis. So why is the county attorney or the prosecutor from Arkansas not doing that analysis, Nadarb? You reference what the rules are. Look to me like he used deadly force. Was he justified in doing that? Was there a direct threat to him or his life or his safety? No. She was just driving. So I think he should be charged, in fact. How about that? We have Sharon Quidney says, why only 100 grand? Maybe the PD isn't good for more than that. Or, maybe it's just, so, this is something interesting also. You get different verdicts because you have different jurors in different parts of the country. So I don't practice civil law, never done a civil jury trial or have any, any experience in civil litigation, other than I did some very brief personal injury work. But outside of that, not a whole lot of experience there. But if you are, suing in different cities or different states, you get different verdicts. Some juries just don't like to award verdicts. They just say, no, you're just suing for money. You're just money hungry. I'm not going to award you anything. I think California, by contrast, is very, very accommodating. They just, it's a big corporation, whatever, right? Or the insurance company is going to be paying for that, whatever. So they award big fees, whereas some other more conservative states just don't. So maybe they know that, which is why they're asking for only a low amount. And we'll see. We have Arnie B5 says that last page you displayed asked for damages exceeding 100,000. Okay, so that's a good point. So maybe they're just putting that in there because that is a sort of a threshold, right? There are sometimes I could be wrong about this. I don't practice law in Arkansas, so I don't know, right? Maybe they're really asking for $10 million, but they have to put that threshold limitation down so in order to get it into that court. So there are certain provisions. Again, I don't practice personal injury law. We only do criminal law here. But there are certain rules that in order to file a certain complaint in a certain court, it's got to meet a statutory threshold of an amount of damages. So, you can't sue somebody, let's say for $25 in a superior court because it's $25, right? Go to small claims, get out of here with that stuff. So maybe here what they have to do is just properly plead that it is going to be exceeding $100,000 when they do come up with the calculation. Now, part of the reason why this lawsuit is happening, just to sort of frame this out for you, remember this happened back in 2020, I think July, almost a year ago. So presumably this woman has been treating this entire time, and they should have a good idea of what the medical bills are. And if her attorneys are worth anything, they got her the appropriate treatment that she needs. They're not just sort of sending her on her own to go figure it out. They have, medical doctors who specialize in accidents and especially, vehicle flips and things like that, because there are all sorts of things that happen to your body when you're involved in an accident like that a regular doctor just doesn't know much about. So if the doctors did that, well, then of course they're going to inflate her medical bills up dramatically, giving her the treatment that she needs and deserves, by the way. And they'll lump that into their request for the ultimate damages. And I'm gonna guess. I mean, $100,000 sounds very low to me. So this makes more sense. If it's exceeding 100, it probably just means that they are meeting the threshold minimum and that the damages may be significantly more than that. So very good catch on that, Arnie B5. Thank you for that. And this is what is so awesome about this show. It's just like, I kind of fly through the material and I am, kind of going off the cuff on a lot of this stuff, and you catch me and you correct me, and the Fed and the monetary policy and fiscal policy and the government and the whole thing it's complicated. I think I got that right. I'll have to revisit this after the show. We have Joe Snow says, in your opinion, is this the kind of disregard for human life that can be trained out of these room temperature IQ drones? So that's no. I mean, I don't know. I've never been a big proponent of the train it away. I don't know what that means. How do you do that? We talked about this earlier this week, Joe, where we were mentioning, the 10 different guards out of New York City who are beating women and breaking their eye sockets and hitting them 28 times. Like, maybe they just need some more training to not beat people 28 times, smash people's heads 28 times with your fist when they're a prisoner and you are a prison guard. You need a class on that. This guy needs a class on not ramming another vehicle with his. No, the guy's just whacked, right? He should be removed immediately and probably charged with a crime. Absolutely charged with a crime, I think. All right. Now let's see. Want to know says he should have pulled her out and tased her and handcuffed her to be a total a-hole. Yeah. Yeah. I know. Pinky 2 says, oh my goodness, who do they think they are? Police and bad Popo at highway speeds? That could have been deadly. No question about it. Pinky, I know it's bad. Joe Snow says he feared for his life. He had a family to get home to. I know. He was going to be late for dinner. We don't have all day here. Okay. Pull over. All right. You got about 30 more seconds here. It's been about 2 minutes, but you gotta, all right, that's enough. Taking this into my own hands. Let's go, Johnny. Boom. Pregnant woman. Flipped over. Could be potentially dead. Hopefully she sees some serious monetary damages there. And there are repercussions for that officer, because it's only a matter of time until he does that again or somebody else gets killed. One man's humble opinion. Okay, so long show today. My goodness, we've been going for a while, but a lot of good content, a lot of great questions. The content was marginal. The questions and your participation was outstanding, and I appreciate that. So I want to thank all of you who were able to join us at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Quick welcome to Polaris. Welcome, Polaris, who joined us at the community. If you want to sign up, you can. The address is down here. watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Lots of questions today. Oh my goodness, look at all these questions coming in from all of you. Thank you so much. Appreciate all the love there. Everybody, they were great questions and very interesting topic. I wasn't sure, or very interesting conversation. I wasn't sure how how the inflation conversation would go, but a lot of great questions, and I'm learning a lot. So thank you for allowing me to learn in public a little bit, kind of explore these ideas, open them up, and kind of muddle my way through them, and being so accommodating and conversational and understanding. I appreciate your courtesies there. All right, so if you are not already a member at watchingthewatchers.locals.com and you want to be, let's take a look at what you can get when you sign up. You get a free copy of my book, first of all. You can download the slides that we went through today. We have some templates that you can download. You can download my personal productivity system called Existence Systems. Download that template, make it your own. We share links throughout the day. There's a lot of great people over there. We have a monthly locals meetup that is coming up on June 26th. Our last one was on May. It was a lot of fun. We are going to be doing it again June 26th. This Saturday, though, we've got the law enforcement interaction training. I just finished the PowerPoint, or I'm not done with it yet. I've got probably another about 40% left. But I'm liking it. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. And I have this fun clip of this officer who's like, oh, children, make sure that you have your registration available and, be kind to the officers. And he gives them one little last tidbit of advice that not good advice. So we're going to talk about what that is on Saturday. It is free for anybody who's a supporter over at Locals. If you're over there, you're going to notice that there's a pinned post that has the registration form. So go check that out. It is going to be recorded, so keep that in mind. If you do not want to be recorded, turn your camera off or change your name or whatever, because I am going to be recording it for those who cannot make it. So there will be some interaction depending on the size of the group. It can only be chat if you want. So we're going to have fun with it. It's going to be the first one. Going to see if we can sort of get into a rhythm with some stuff like this. Monthly meetups, some interactive trainings and things like that, just to have some fun with the community over there at Locals. Want you to be a part of it. watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Before we get out of here, a couple quick reminders. There are some new links down below. So I am on Gum Road now. So the law enforcement interaction training is also going to be uploaded to Gum Road, which is where some of my informational offerings are. So I'm going to be spending some time on that. So go take a look at that. Follow me there or bookmark that if you want. We also have other channels down below, which I want to plug briefly. Crypto channel. We have a non-live channel for more of my deep dive recordings. There's one on Nicholas Wade's article about the Wuhan coronavirus lab escape theory that's over on that channel. Crypto I mentioned. And then we have R&R Law Group. Of course, that's what we do on a daily basis. It's what this whole show started from, was my experience practicing law and building a law firm. We love to help good people facing criminal charges. That's why I get so fired up about these issues on this show, because we want to help people and provide value to them in their lives. And so if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona who is facing criminal charges, we would love the opportunity to help. We offer free case evaluations. We can help with any type of criminal case in the state of Arizona, whether it's a misdemeanor, a felony case, if it's a traffic case, if it's one of those criminal speeding charges that we talked about, we can help with that and so much more. We can help clear up old cases. We can help restore a person's rights so they can vote again and feel like a full citizen and participate in this beautiful thing called America. We want to help people do that. So if you happen to know anybody, we would be honored and humbled, truly, if you sent them our direction so that we had the opportunity to help. We just want to make sure that they are in a good position, whether that is with working with us or if we can help them and send them on their way, we're happy to do that as well. And so all of our information is down below. We also have a YouTube channel for Arizona law if you're interested in that. So please feel free to check those out. Otherwise, my friends, it has been a tremendous time with you today. We're going to be back here, same place, same time tomorrow, doing the same thing again. It's going to be Friday. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. And so I will see you then and there. It's going to be at the same time, same place, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. Mountain time, 6 p.m. Central time, 7 p.m. East Coast for that one Florida man as well. Everybody, have a tremendous evening. Sleep very well. I will see you here tomorrow. Bye-bye.